Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in 1 minute. We're going to start at 10 a.m. sharp.
My name is Ira Harkavy. I'm founding chair of the Anchor Institutions Task Force and founding director of the Netter Center. And I want to welcome all of you. See a lot of long-term friends and new friends. I want to welcome all of you to Philadelphia, the city of champions. In spite of last night's debacle, it is also the city that has the best weather in the United States, as you can see today. But I want to welcome you on behalf of the University of Pennsylvania and the Netter Center. And we are very pleased to be hosting this with the Anchor Institutions Task Force as part of the Netter Center's 30th anniversary celebration. Now, I should indicate that from its founding, AITF has been based on and animated by core values. The values of collaboration and partnership, equity and social justice, democracy and democratic practice, and a commitment to place and to community. And AITF members and the organization itself have made clear that being anchored in a locality does not make an institution a democratic anchor institution. It does not make it a democratic anchor institution. What an institution does in practice and how it does it is what matters. Being a democratic anchor institution is not about having employment, procurement, housing, real estate, and commercial programs for the community, although that may be a good thing to do. It is about engaging in comprehensive, mission-oriented, democratic, mutually transformative partnerships with the community. Partnerships designed to contribute to inclusivity, equity, social and racial justice, and democracy itself. And that is what AITF is, has been, and is currently about. These values in AITF's approach have had an impact, not just in the United States, but globally. And it's had this impact primarily among higher education institutions, but indeed now among other anchors. For example, creating democratic anchors was the central theme at the Global Forum in Dublin, held in June 2022, on the topic of higher education, leadership for democracy, sustainability, social justice. And there were 40 countries represented there. And the idea of democratic anchors captured those delegates from those 40 countries. And a few of us were at that meeting, and we were impressed with the reach of the democratic anchor idea and the reach of the Anchor Institution Task Force. The forum was sponsored by the Global Cooperation for the Democratic Mission of Higher Education, consisting of the Council of Europe, the International Association of Universities, the International Consortium for Higher Education, Civic Responsibility and Democracy, which AITF is a core member of the steering committee, and the Organization of American States. So AITF's reach has not just been national and not just in localities, but indeed globally. Working to realize the values I mentioned, the values of collaboration and partnership, of equity and social justice, the values of democracy and democratic practice and commitment to place and community, realizing and working to realize these values has never been more significant, has never been more important than it is now. The problems we are facing are so difficult. They are so complex. They are so historically rooted that is only through democratic partnerships with communities, involving multiple partners, multiple anchors, that we will be able to transform the current deeply distressing, indeed pernicious conditions facing our communities. Building equitable, anti-racist, decent, and just societies require what this meeting is about, the power and potential of anchor institutions. But it's more than that. Building equitable, anti-racist, decent, and just societies requires that the power and potential of anchor institutions has to be realized in practice, not just in theory, in practice. Among the significant things about our gathering today is the various partnerships representing not only community partners and universities, but a diverse group of anchors, not just colleges and universities, but hospitals, medical centers, health systems, city government, nonprofits, regional reserve banks, museums, corporations, public school districts, and community development financial institutions. The veterans in this room who began this work in 2009 recognize what an enormous change this is. A change that evolved from the field. It wasn't from on high, from the leadership, whatever that is of the organization, but it is from the field itself. And that's been a great strength of AITF. Creating these partnerships is no simple thing. We actually really do need each other. We need to share experiences. We need to listen and learn from each other. We need to understand this work together. And then we need to take these learnings and turn them into action in and with our communities. I cannot express really how deeply interested I am in today's conversation, how I look forward to today's conversation, our ongoing dialogue and partnership, because I believe it's absolutely, as I've indicated, essential to move from here to there. From here, the conditions that are, in a certain respect, inhuman, to create a human, decent, just, anti-racist, inclusive, democratic society. So again, I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. Look forward to our conversations. And with that, I want to turn to my good colleague and the extraordinary director of AITF, a partner in crime for more years than I'd like to recount, but it's been all terrific, my good friend, David Morass. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ira. And I think it's roughly 25 years that we have known each other now. So it's been great to see the evolution of our connection, which began when I was at the Rockefeller Foundation and you were here. And then ultimately we ended up staying tag team partners all the way to the point where we created the Anchor Institutions Task Force back in 2009. Welcome everyone to this extremely exciting event. It is so important, as Ira mentioned, for us to take on this particular topic, something that we are really prioritizing in the Anchor Institutions Task Force. We consider the task force to be an action-oriented learning community. So for us, it is about creating spaces for mutual exchange and learning among peers in this field, but to take that learning and influence action in your respective communities, but also in terms of the field writ large. And it really is our responsibility as the Anchor Institutions Task Force to make sure that we are addressing the most crucial issues facing the Anchor Institutions movement. And this is really one of the areas, as Ira mentioned, that we really think is worthy of the kind of conversation that we're going to have. And to be honest with you, this conversation has been ongoing this year through one of our subgroups. We have an Anchor Partnership subgroup. 6 of the partnerships that have been involved in that subgroup will be speaking on panels today, so you're going to hear from them. And the other 2 partnerships who are not speaking today are also very much engaged in this work. So we're going to be hearing from each other all throughout this particular day. I do want to acknowledge that subgroup for providing an ongoing space for learning and exchange that has been incredibly thrilling and has already had a significant impact, as I think you'll be hearing throughout this day. And we're so appreciative of having that opportunity. I also want to thank Ira and the Netter Center, as well as Rita Hodges, for the incredible work that has been put into organizing this event and providing us this incredible venue, which is perfect for a meeting of this sort. So very much want to appreciate the Perry World House as our event host today. I also want to appreciate Jason West, who is my colleague at Marga Incorporated, who is back there at the control center, who you've all seen in your inbox over the course of the last couple of weeks. So thanks very much to Jason for all your work. You're seeing on stage a quartet of people who meet on a quarterly basis to talk about the direction of the Anchor Institutions Task Force. So up here, along with Ira, our founding chair of the task force, are Nancy Cantor and David Pearlstein, who are our co-chairs of the task force. And we're going to be hearing from them in a few minutes. And also want to thank our advisory council of the task force. Please raise your hands, those of you who are here from our advisory council. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and your insights have been extraordinary in terms of helping to move our conversations forward. So that is greatly appreciated. And I also want to thank some of our ongoing supporters of the task force, Prudential, as well as the Teagle Foundation, which have been supporting us as we have kind of evolved and shifted over the years. Those of you who've been around the task force for some time know that we usually at this time of year do a very large annual conference, which we stopped doing in 2019, of course, and then the pandemic came and we really had to reinvent ourselves. And I think that reinvention has been extraordinarily fruitful in terms of some of the content that we've been addressing in our work. Some of which is on anchor partnerships, which you will be hearing about today, which we again think is so crucial to the future of this work. And some of it is also on leadership and how to sustain this work over time. And so these are themes that we'll be hearing about a little bit over the course of time as well. As far as our meeting agenda is concerned, we are definitely going to end on time at 3 o'clock, even if we go over here and there over the course of time. So we'll be monitoring that as we go, but we'll make sure we will end on time for sure. We wanted to design this event in a way that people could get in and out easily. Just in terms of the content of our agenda, it also is very reflective of some areas that we really think are worthy of a deeper dive. We can see that on your panel, we basically have 3 topics. The first topic is equitable growth. We are absolutely supportive of the notion of growth and development and economic development in communities. But if it doesn't have an equity lens, then ultimately it's going to fail the most historically underserved populations in communities. And that is just a reality that we all face in this kind of work. So how do we make sure we integrate that equitable lens into the work as we pursue it? And so you're going to hear from 2 anchor partnerships who are thinking about this particular kind of angle and approach to the work. And also you can see racial equity is the topic of our next agenda. As Ira mentioned, we're seeking anti-racist partnerships. We saw what happened over the last few years in terms of the pandemic, laying bare and exacerbating some of the deep, deep racial inequities that exist in communities. We can't solve any of the kinds of issues we talk about addressing in communities, whatever they are, whether they're economically oriented, health related, education related. We can't solve any of them really unless we have a racial equity lens. So we're going to hear from a couple of other anchor partnerships who are bringing a racial equity lens into their work and talking about how they're exploring that and successes and challenges and things to consider going forward. And our last panel is going to be on next directions for this work. This work has done extraordinary things over the last few years. We've seen a real proliferation of the creation of multi-institutional anchor partnerships in communities. But where do we go from there? Where do we go from this particular point? And that panel is going to give us a real opportunity to hear about some extraordinary new work that's happening here in Philadelphia, and then also some work that's been happening from a veteran anchor institution partnership and their thoughts on how to move forward in this field. And then we'll talk a little bit about some research that we've been doing at the Anchor Institutions Task Force, and then move to our closing. And so I mentioned leadership before, and we recently released a leadership guide for aspiring and existing anchor institution leaders, which we released just a few days ago. It's circulating, it's on our site. Please do take a look. It's going to be a part of a series of different resources that we want to put out on this concept. The conversation around leadership has been very lively in our higher education presidents subgroup, which is also represented here today. Those of you who are in our higher education presidents subgroup, please do raise your hand who are here with us. And we want to appreciate you for, in these smaller scale spaces. This is where this action-oriented learning community really takes life. And we see it before our eyes and engage in it in really strategic, I think, and beneficial ways, where we are having open exchanges and conversations about successes and challenges that then spark ideas about different projects that we should pursue to be beneficial for the field. And so this leadership guide is a part of that. We also created out of the presidential subgroup a fellows program. I know that we have some current and future fellows who are represented here. Please do raise your hand, those of you who are anchor fellows or future anchor fellows. We want to appreciate you too, because this was a way for us to intentionally take on how we begin to play some role. How does the Anchor Institutions Task Force make a contribution to the future of leadership of this work? We know it is not easy to find CEOs of anchor institutions who are fully bought into the kinds of values and principles that Ira laid out earlier on. It is not easy to find. And so when we see retirements of some of these longstanding anchor institution leaders who've been incredible voices and visionaries for this work, we have reason to wonder about what's moving forward. Then when we look at the conversations that are underway about leadership and about what are the priorities and the responsibilities for anchor institution leaders, we have to consider that as well. This work has to be considered a priority for anchor institutions, not something that is ancillary. So I say this because I want to use this as a lead-in to our next two panelists, who are both anchor institution leaders, one of a university and one of a hospital, who are leading what we would like to call community-centric anchor institutions, institutions that are working deeply in local communities and inherently engage with long-standing underserved populations. And so the first of those two speakers is Nancy Cantor, and would like to turn to you, Nancy, for some remarks on why it's important for us to pursue this particular topic of multi-institutional anchor partnerships and anything else you'd like to share.
Thank you, David. Is this on? Yes, I guess so. So I just first want to say repetition is a good thing, right? Because I'm going to repeat a lot of what my dear colleagues have said. David asked David and I to talk about the rationale for why we're focusing today on anchor partnerships. And I think first thing I want to do is lay out what I see as sort of the evolutionary phases since we've been doing this anchor work. So Anchor Institution 1.0, if you will, was when Ira pulled us all together in 2008, I think it was, when Sean Donovan was in HUD, and asked him and then a group of us to write a white paper on what anchor institutions could do in communities. And I say Anchor 1.0 because what came out of that sense of collective was really a focus on galvanizing individual anchor institutions across a variety of sectors, but individual anchor institutions to remind them, if you will, remind all of us that there's a power in collaborating with community-based organizations in the democratic, mutually beneficial relationships and community development work that Ira spoke about. So if that was Anchor 1.0, Anchor 2.0 really has developed in terms of the racial equity lens that David and Ira were talking about. You can't do good, democratically based, mutually beneficial anchor work in most of our communities without a racial equity lens. You can't make progress, nor really should you make progress, because so many of the things that we work on for equitable growth have been racialized and baked in that way. And so the realization that the social determinants of health or wealth gaps or education or public safety or environmental justice, name your area, for most of us, you can't do good anchor work without a racial equity lens. I'll just say it that way. Anchor 2.0. Well, now I would argue we're in Anchor 3.0. And Anchor 3.0 is really that you can't do it alone. That galvanizing anchor partnerships across sectors and in collaboration in community is really the only way to jumpstart equitable, racially equitable growth in community. And, you know, in many respects, Anchor 1.0, certainly in 2.0, were really sort of two-way streets. It was the anchor institution and a community partner, let's say. And then we got the racial equity lens and that broadened it. Now we have an opportunity in 3.0 to really broaden it across sectors, not just in a one-by-one kind of two-way street, but across sectors in real partnerships, deeply in communities. And then I want to say that the rationale for moving to 3.0, which I see as so urgent now, I think has three parts. One is this ridiculous national landscape we are in. I mean, I don't need to tell you this, right? So the divisiveness of our national landscape means that local opportunities take on a much more powerful role. We always have talked about anchor work as being place-based, but I want to argue that the local anchor partnership energy can get over or around or on top of the divisiveness nationally. And what we've certainly seen in our great city of Newark is that organizations, corporations, cultural institutions, educational hospitals, who might otherwise be wary of what their voice is nationally in that landscape, when it's local, it works. And it works because there's a certain comfort, if you will, in the partnerships that give legitimacy to doing radical racial equity work on the ground locally. So the first thing I think is the local opportunity. And in fact, the local opportunity has an urgency because otherwise we're all losing public trust left and right. And I mean left and right. So we really need to do that local partnership and galvanization. The second thing is indeed the power of collective action. What has been racially baked in to our society and our communities is not going to be changed by one local anchor institution, no matter how much we work 24/7. The power of collective action is so obvious now, if it hasn't been obvious before. And part of that is that every aspect of community development work bleeds over into every other aspect of community development work. And so we need all of the voices, all of the lenses at the table together to make change really possible. And then finally, there is a huge advantage to the fact that AITF has always been a big tent. That is what I view as the secret sauce in AITF, that it has always galvanized very different kinds of organizations. In Anchor 1.0, we did them by ourselves, but they were all at the table. The racial equity lens got us to see how they were interconnected. Now we can really play on that by pulling it together. So when you've got a hospital and a cultural institution and a university and a huge corporation and a local community-based, faith-based organization, and on and on and on, working together, you get the local emphasized, you get over the national divisiveness, you get the collective action, and you get the value of very different nuances brought to the table together so that we can learn from each other. So for me, that's the power of Anchor 3.0. And I think we're on to it.
Thank you so much. And now we'll hear from David Pearlstein.
I'll just finish. I'm proud to be part of this movement. Look forward to today's discussion, but mostly tomorrow's accomplishments. There we go. I can finish. So I'm the newbie to this table. My name is David Pearlstein. I'm a pediatrician, a general pediatrician by training, and I'm working in the Bronx for about 22 years. In 2016, I became the CEO, president and CEO of SBH Health System, which is a independent community hospital that primarily takes care of poor people. Completely underfunded, completely struggling all the time. However, I was invited with a developer who's a good friend of the hospitals and does a lot of really great work in New York City and beyond, to actually talk about a mixed-use development that we had been building, or we're talking about building because it hadn't really started yet. And part of that was 314 units of affordable housing. We donated the land. We had 2 different parcels of land we could donate. And they put up 314 units of housing. More than half of it was reserved for for anyone living in the Bronx, first of all, so you couldn't just import folks. But 95 units were actually reserved for previously homeless individuals or high utilizers, which are folks that are in and out of the emergency department and obviously need more case management. At the center of that, and again, that's not my skill set, I'm not a housing guy, but we, in exchange, got 50,000 square feet to build out of wellness space. And we obviously, as a hospital used to delivering acute care, had to figure out what that meant. And for us, what that meant was trying to address the burden of disease in a way that would address the current issues, but also prevent future issues. So we put in a gym that's open to the community and to the staff and to patients, a medical model. We put in teaching kitchens where we can actually present more nutritional ways to cook meals. And then we also put in a rooftop farm, and we put most of our primary care, our women's and children's programs in that space as well. Because our feeling was we can address the parents and the grandparents now, but that's a lot harder than if I just go after the kids and try to keep them healthy on the way up. So of course we opened it in 2019, right before COVID, so that didn't go well. But today it's fully functioning. And our community is benefiting from this. And we have programs with violence interrupters. We're teaching boxing to kids. We've got already shown that we can actually impact BMI, obesity measures, by combining exercise with the kitchen. We have a green market that we give away foods for patients. People have heard of pharmacy with a FA arm. We're not doing anything brand new, guys. These are things that were developed, but no one in my community or my type of community were able to do that. And it was funded in part by the state. So there's the partnership that we got. But we are incredibly proud of it. And I will tell you that we are strengthening those partnerships with the community, with our community-based organizations, providers and payers, and we're going to be expanding that impact. So David, Nancy, and I have already spoken about all the things that we all already recognize because you've all drank the Kool-Aid already. But as a pediatrician and a CEO of a safety net hospital in the Bronx, I believe in this collaborative model. The Bronx currently sits 62nd out of the 62 counties as measured by the Robert Johnson County Health Rankings. And it's been there forever, since they started this ranking system. And what that means, in a word, is the Bronx ranks the worst on the length and the quality of life of its residents. And then also the social determinants of health that actually influence the length and the quality of life. So over the past few years, as we all know, COVID, shined a light on the burden of preventable diseases. And those preventable diseases were ravaging the Bronx way before COVID. But we kind of feel like we finally got attention, even though I would argue in the middle of this, or right before this, during the opiate crisis, I went to a meeting at NIH to talk about the impact that that opiates have and addiction has in the Bronx. And at the end of that meeting, what it dawned on me is that they were going to put a huge investment into New Hampshire because all of a sudden lots of white people were addicted. And I stood up and I said something and I never got invited back. So I know how to treat asthma and diabetes. I can treat those really, really easily. Heart disease, I was on my way to do a pediatric cardiology fellowship when I changed my mind. I can even treat depression and substance abuse. We have the means. What I'm not great is implementing broad-based programs that actually prevent all those things from happening, at least not alone. We have a system that doesn't support that practice, guys. We have a system that supports my spending as much money as I can and doing transplants on people. Those are the folks that seem to be able to make money. Primary care does not pay for the covered cost. And in fact, in New York right now, Medicaid, and we are primarily a Medicaid provider, probably up to 80% of our, 83% of our patients are in part covered by Medicaid. It only covers about 61 cents on the dollar of cost. I have an MBA, but you don't need an MBA to do that math, guys. So what I'm a strong advocate for is that we have to collectively change the care model. We have to demand that these care models receive funding. And both the private and the public sector have to be held to account to make sure that happens. And collaboration is the only way to ensure success. Anchor institutions share a common responsibility to be good, participatory neighbors. I'll say it again. We're not just there hoping to gentrify and get better payers. And we have the collective power and infrastructure to actually leave the community better off than we found it. And we can create opportunities for our neighbors to live productive and hopeful lives. And I would argue many of them are not. But just like everybody else, they want to. If anyone doubts that, you should probably leave. I believe that really through this anchor collaboration, we can develop training programs, educational opportunities, healthy lifestyle options that will lead to a higher quality of life for the members of our communities. And our communities, as we've stated multiple times up here on this dais, have suffered from years of neglect and racist policies that resulted in income inequality and opportunity inequality that keeps people from living happier and healthier lives. So the individuals that are here today are from a myriad of different types of anchor institutions and from government. And we have to wield our collective economic and political power to influence policy and funding and change the paradigm permanently. And as I said at the beginning, I'm proud to be part of the movement, and I look forward to today's discussions, but mostly to tomorrow's accomplishments. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David, and thank you to our AITF Council of Chairs for welcoming us and providing us insights for the rationale for this meeting. And we're just gonna go right to our first panel. So panelists, please do come up to the stage. And so while we're doing this, just remember, those of you who need the restroom, it is off to the back this way. So you either can go out the back or go through this particular area. And this is going to be our panel on equitable growth. And as we have mentioned, as we talked about the rationale for this meeting, equitable growth is a critical component of how we think about this work moving forward. And quite frankly, it's an area where we've heard criticisms of the anchor institutions field. People say, oh, anchor institutions, they're the gentrifiers. They're the institutions who are going to displace in the community. And we absolutely know that happens. But we want to make sure that it doesn't happen, or we minimize the impacts and the harmful effects of this kind of development on communities. So now I'm going to turn us to our panel, and we have two different multi-institutional anchor partnerships represented. One, the Central Corridor Anchor Partnership from Minneapolis, and another, the Tacoma Anchor Network from Tacoma, Washington. And so another thing I'll say, as you hear from the different anchor partnerships over the course of the day, we don't believe there is one single model for how anchor partnerships are designed or structured, where they're hosted, who the partners are, how they're managed, because you're going to hear such great variation across these different partnerships in terms of how they do their work. They do it in a way that is best for their particular local context. So that's something I just want us to keep in mind as we go. So I want to first turn to our representative from the Central Corridor Anchor Partnership, Paul Pribenow, who's also one of our advisory council members. And let's go straight to you.
Thanks, David, and thanks. Just wonderful to be here with all of you. Thanks to Ira and Nancy and the two Davids for their inspiration. So I'm actually not a part of the subgroup, even though I am the chair of the Central Corridor Anchor Partnership, because one of the things we've been trying to do is to get other folks to come to these tables. And so, but none of them could be here today. So I'm here representing the Central Corridor Anchor Partnership, which I'm happy to do. So the Central Corridor Anchor Partnership was founded in 2012 as a very large group of eds and meds. It was really a more traditional mix of eds and meds along a new light rail line that connected downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And I have to say that one of the things that was important to us is that that kind of rail line actually defined a region for us. And that became an important part because that region, a mile on either side of that light rail line, were in fact neighborhoods that were particularly underserved, BIPOC neighborhoods along the line. Augsburg University, of which I'm the president, is actually located in one of those neighborhoods, Cedar Riverside. It is the most diverse zip code between Chicago and Los Angeles. All of our neighbors are Somali and Ethiopian, and so it's that you go down that line. You have Frogtown, you have downtown Minneapolis, you have downtown St. Paul. So it's a fascinating mix of neighborhoods, but many of them were really had some serious poverty challenges. So I have to say that that idea of a region, though, for me, it was some new kind of leadership coming to our table with our partnership, has actually been challenged as kind of a Western idea. And it's been really interesting as we've grown over the past 10 years, how new voices come to the table and challenge us, especially around some of the racial equity kind of issues that Nancy talked about. So this partnership actually emerged from a local and national funders collaborative that had been formed nearly actually 10 years earlier. So we were founded in 2012 as a partnership, but in 2002, a group of funders came together because they knew that that light rail line was going to be built, and they wanted to make sure that preparation was done in a whole variety of fronts to get there. And our partnership was one of those things. And so I have to say that because of their attention to this, there actually has right from the beginning been this focus on equity and equitable growth because of the neighborhoods that they know would be impacted by this light rail line. So our initial work focused on 5 areas of action: local purchasing, workforce development, the things that Ira mentioned, transit, placemaking, and student engagement. And one of the things that we were blessed with is that the initial costs and funding for the partnership was actually completely funded by the Funders Collaborative, which meant we had a lot of members because they didn't have to pay anything. It didn't cost them anything. So we had every ed and med along that line. Both the community colleges, Minneapolis and St. Paul community colleges, were a very crowded city, just like Philadelphia in terms of higher education. So we had Hamlin and St. Kate's and St. Thomas and the University of Minnesota and Metro State and Augsburg and Bethel. And so it was a big table and actually hard to kind of corral because there were a lot of different interests around that table. So over the first several years, the foundation support was weaned off, of course, was phased out. And so actually we came back to a kind of a core group of us who are now there. And so it's about 7 higher education institutions and 4 hospital systems that are part of the work. And our work is actually supported by an independent consultant, Lewis Smith, who is actually part of the subgroup, who is an attorney who focuses on urban partnerships. So that's the way we've chosen to staff this. And those of us who are around the table actually contribute a fairly significant amount every year to fund the infrastructure for the partnership. So from the beginning, we have been very focused on metrics that address our core work. For example, in those first couple of years, we set hiring goals for members, for employees from the neighborhoods along the light rail line. Of course, this was an equity lens because we knew in those neighborhoods. So we set an initial goal of 5% increase in the employment by our institutions. In 5 years, reduce the racial gap by 4% in 5 years. We set purchasing targets from local businesses. So intended to increase local anchor purchasing 5% in 3 years. We set goals for transit use by employees and students to increase it 5% in 5 years. So we had this whole metric kind of model in place right from the beginning. We had really, in some ways, even as much as I value the Anchor Institution Task Force, in many ways, our initial work was actually more driven by the kind of living cities model. And so I think a lot of this, came out of that. And what I've seen over time is that my participation in this has now brought us back, I think, to the Anchor Institution 2.0 and 3.0 that Nancy pointed to, which has been an important part of the evolution of the work. One of the things we also did early on was actually to track the income levels in the neighborhoods along the light rail line. And I'm not going to claim any cause and effect here, but we actually did see that, in fact, the light rail line overall and our efforts did, in fact, lead to a decrease in the poverty levels in several of the neighborhoods along the line. As our work has evolved, we have found significant traction really in 3 areas. Transit use, which is huge for our population, again, trying to drive, both of kind of environmental kind of issues there, but also just a more equitable transit system. We have been working specifically on creating a diverse employment pipeline, especially for our healthcare partners. And then the third area has actually been capital investments by our members in the communities. So I just want to say a quick word about each of those. So in transit, one of the things we did with all the numbers of employees and students that we had, we worked closely with Metro Transit, which is our local transit kind of overview or kind of framework. And they actually created, and Augsburg happened to be the first one to get this, a pass, which all of our students have access to. They get it free. And it actually gives them the opportunity to ride all of the buses and the light rail lines throughout the academic year without paying. Now, we've factored that into tuition, of course, and things, so we pay for it. But the truth is, for every student, when they show up, they get this pass. And started with Augsburg, it's now spread to all of the higher education institutions in the Twin Cities that are part of this partnership. And so a huge increase in ridership, which has helped Metro Transit, but also really increasing access for our students to many of different activities along the line, as well as to our own institutions. The workforce diversity is actually probably our primary focus at the moment. We have a program called C3 Fellows, and it started actually with the community colleges, the 2 community colleges, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and it was focused on getting community college students who had an interest in working in healthcare, that is, they were doing an associate's degree in that area, getting them into the hospitals as employees while they were still in school. And the focus was that if they get in, they have a leg up. When they finish their degree, they'll get a chance to move up the line into whatever the particular profession they might have focused on. And so that was a great success early on, because what it did is it actually increased the pay level for those students from those community colleges who were making before this program, maybe something like $9.50 an hour. And we showed that in fact, when they got into the hospital systems, they were making $14 or $15 an hour. So it really just had a direct impact on their well-being in the short term, but also then gave them those opportunities for advancement. As the four-year colleges got involved with this program, then we realized that, we didn't have, LPN programs and things. We really needed to think about a broader way of increasing the kind of pathways into healthcare institutions. And given the diversity of our student bodies at our area institutions, Augsburg is about 60% BIPOC at this point in terms of our student body. So we are popular with the healthcare providers because we can provide a diverse pipeline. So they started to work with us then on other areas within those hospitals where paid internships could be that first step in. So finance, marketing, IT. So that has given the four-year schools now a chance to be deeply involved with this program. And then the final area that we focused on was community investment. So two of our members, both M Health Fairview, which is the University of Minnesota's hospital system, and Augsburg have now actually begun to put capital back into the neighborhoods along the line. So I'll give a quick example for Augsburg. We were gifted, the gift that never stops giving, a church. And that property is located within the region. And so what we've begun to do with that is actually then to use that as an opportunity for investment and leading to a partnership with a community development organization. We ultimately now are working toward building affordable housing on the site of that church. And so it's property that we own. We will partner with developers to do this. Fascinating population for us to be able to serve, because most of the needs for affordable housing are either in indigenous communities that are directly contiguous to our neighborhood or with the Somali and Ethiopian populations. And so the current idea is that we will end up building about 180 units of housing, including some multi-bedroom apartments that for larger families, which of course is one of the challenges, especially in the immigrant communities. But we are also partnering with the Somali American Museum, which is the only Somali museum in the world, which is in Minneapolis. And they have been founded in a storefront, and they are going to come in and likely occupy 20,000 square feet on the first level of this affordable housing, so that there is actually daily activity in that building, cultural activity, educational opportunities, and the like, that will actually be in the first level of what would be the retail level of that, so that the residents have access to that. So it's been an important project for us as an example of that has come out of our focus on the kind of key ideas behind the Anchor Institution Task Force work. So I will stop there and turn it to my colleagues, many colleagues from Tacoma.
We have you surrounded.
Thank you so much. So we'll turn to our team from Tacoma.
Hi, everyone. There are many of us up here from Tacoma. My name's Danny Fisher-Bruns. I'm an independent consultant. I work for the city of Tacoma in the role of being the backbone facilitator for the Tacoma Anchor Network. I'll just give you a very brief kind of context and overview of this network, and I'll turn it over to these three to tell you a little bit more about their perspective as part of the Anchor institutions participating in this. So the Tacoma Anchor Network began in 2017, 2018 or so, and the ideas were grounded in the work of the Tacoma 2025 strategic plan, which was a very community-driven strategic plan that highlighted a lot of needs and aspirations in the city. A lot of those were around being able to have jobs, local business, safety, transportation, and these sorts of things. And the city very quickly realized that this was a wonderful vision, but there's no way the city could be responsible for pulling this off alone. And it really required the work of all of the major purchasers and employers in the city to do this. And so originally there were 10 or 11 anchor institutions back in 2018. And we did a lot of work to really get engagement into the idea that anchor institutions do have a direct role to play in all of these things. Intentionally or unintentionally, there are impacts of these institutions in the city. And so we got alignment at an executive level for the idea of creating the Tacoma Anchor Network, and then started exploring some some initial things that the anchors could do. But of course, shortly thereafter, the pandemic came upon us. That put a little bit of a pause in the kind of the programmatic exploration of the network, but it was a really interesting relationship and connection opportunity for the anchor institutions themselves because of the existence of this network. For those of you who don't know Tacoma, it's a very collaborative city. And there's a lot of work between institutions happening all of the time. And that's wonderful, but it can also be very confusing because sometimes you're not really sure what all the collaborations are happening. And so because of the existence of this network during the pandemic, the institutions were able to really quickly connect with each other, share about challenges and needs, and really build a lot of trust. This was a place where they could lean on each other and not just keep this collaboration at arm's length and be a little bit skeptical of what it was all about. So coming out of the pandemic, kind of proving that there's value in mutual connections, the network started exploring, what is it that we're actually all about? Collaboration is great, but why are we doing this? And over the course of this summer, the network came up with a vision statement that I'll read to you here. But the Tacoma Anchor Network is creating a new normal for how business is done by leveraging institutional assets to address economic, social, and racial inequities. We work collaboratively to keep resources circulating locally and ensure that all people who live here can work here and all people who work here can afford to live here. And so that's what the network is all about. There's a lot of housing unaffordability happening. A lot of the workforce is being pushed further and further out. And that's not going to create a very good city in the future. But now the work that we're working on now is how are we going to do this? So there are a few priority areas that you'll hear more about, but purchasing, hiring, and investing are, of course, pillars of the work. I see a lot of the work that I'm doing in this facilitative role to be helping the institutions themselves kind of increase their self-awareness of the intentional and unintentional consequences of their normal everyday business practices. So a lot of that is looking at data, but doing that communally across sectors. Can you even tell how much you're purchasing locally? Can you even tell how entry-level employees are advancing or not advancing in your institutions? And the answer is usually no. And so we're trying to figure out how to have that awareness and understand the current state so they're not just jumping into programs that are like peripheral to the work, but really changing the behavior of these organizations for the long term. So I will pause there with the overview and hand it over to Hunter.
All right, good morning. My name is Hunter George, and I manage government relations for Metro Parks Tacoma. We are a metropolitan park district, so we're separate from the city. We have our own, we're like a school district, right? We have our own elected park board. We manage a pretty large system with 70 parks, 2 zoos, all sorts of really interesting things. We think of ourselves more as a social services agency than your typical Parks and Rec department. I lobby the legislature, for example, to change a lot of state laws to help us do more social service providers. Most of my Parks and Rec peers don't do that. I've been participating in the subgroup here on behalf of our group, and I keep telling them, I dragged some of them across the country with me here because I wanted them to meet you, because I've been really inspired by the work that you all are doing. Is that you all are building things, and we haven't gotten there yet. And as Danny said, they got started just before the pandemic. The pandemic hit, really kind of knocked them down. They reset, figured out where to go from there. We've set our mission now, as he read to you. I want to speak to how we get to equity. And the city wasn't able to, the person from the city who is the member representing that organization, he couldn't be here today. So I know he would want to speak to the Tacoma Equity Index, which is this really cool tool that they built. Some of you may have those. If you don't, let's talk. I'd love to show it to you. And in fact, the county got so excited about it. They are, as we speak, in the next month, they'll be launching a count. They took the city's equity index and have layered that countywide now. And it takes census data. It takes all these various metrics, and we can break it down to to census blocks and we know what the social determinants are. We know, I can show you what neighborhoods where people's life, where they're not living as long as they are in the other neighborhoods. And some of it was intuitive. You could look at the city and know, but now we've got the data. And that's starting to underlie everything that the city does. And it's and a lot of the government partners, like my park district, we're starting to use that tool as well. Well, one of the things Danny talked about, Tacoma is this, if you're not familiar with us, so we're about 30 miles south of Seattle. We get compared to Oakland a lot, right? We're the industrial blue collar, we call ourselves the gritty city. So there's a lot of grits, like there's Grit City beer and all these, everybody brands themselves grit. Because Seattle's the big shiny city, and we're the port town with a giant military. We have a big port, one of the largest on the West Coast. We have one of the largest military bases, really blue collar, I feel like we're this perfect size. That Tacoma itself is about 220,000 people. Add the suburbs, and you're over 300,000. We're big enough that we have resources. We have 3 universities. You're going to hear from my friend George here in a minute. We have 3 universities. We have 3 or 4 community colleges that are part of the network. We have 2 significant, 2 large health systems that are private. They're nonprofit systems. They manage multiple hospitals. They manage hospitals throughout the Puget Sound region, so not just Tacoma. That's been one of the challenges for them, is you're part of this Tacoma network, but you also serve all these other cities. And so it's been a journey for them to realize that it's worth their time and investment to spend some time on Tacoma, because that you'll be able to take what you learned from that and take it to other communities. But it's not been an easy thing, because a couple of they've said to us, like, we're worried they're going to get mad at us that we're spending all this time on Tacoma. But I call Tacoma, it's a little big town. And so we're big enough where we have things like 2 major medical systems that employ 10,000 people each. We have these universities and community colleges, and we're also small enough that we can make a handful of calls and fill the room with the CEOs. And in fact, as Danny pointed out, we have so many partnerships, that's become a concern for people. And this anchor network it's taken some time. I get pushback a lot. I'm the lead staff person for a different partnership that's only municipal. It's all the government agencies that serve Tacoma. And so the Alicia's boss, the superintendent of the school district, has been like, why are we doing this one too? There's too many. And so it's making sure, one of the lessons we're learning is how to make sure we're not being duplicative. And that the work is complementary. So I'm going to lead into, it's a long way of saying we're fairly new. We haven't built anything yet. And I see what you all are doing, the example in the Bronx, the development there. To me, that's the holy grail. That's where I'm hoping we go. There's a couple of communities. One other thing I wanted to say are those 2 hospital systems. The hospitals are at either end of a distressed neighborhood. And that should sound really familiar to some of you, because I've heard you describe some of your projects. And they're building light rail that's going to open next year that's going to connect those 2 things. Really, really similar to things we're hearing. And so, again, don't make the same old mistakes. Let's go make new mistakes. And so we're trying to learn from you all. So what we've done with our group is we've created 3 work groups, because this is about building trust and let's get some wins. Let's see what we can accomplish here. And so we've created a work group on procurement, a work group on affordable housing, and one on career pathways. And again, Alicia will talk, actually, I'll hand off to you. Alicia will talk more in detail about what those work groups are doing.
See, is it on? Okay. Hi, I'm Alicia Laver. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning with Tacoma Public Schools. And I like to say that the Tacoma area, I will say, because we like to squish out. We're not like border specific. We've got a greater Tacoma area. I like to say that we're big enough, but small enough. We're big enough to get a lot of good things done and small enough to make them happen. We are nimble. It was great to hear some of the things that your network has been doing, because even outside of the network, Tacoma is an area of partnerships. It's what we do. We're gritty, we're scrappy, we get it done. We currently have transit free for all children 18 and under throughout the area with Pierce Transit there. We have just so many variety of partnerships like the Metro Parks and us. In order to reduce or to increase access to parks, we're collaborating on school parks, where we're going to have city parks on school property where they don't have land, and how do we co-invest on that? We have after school programs that are with the foundation, with the Children's Museum, with the Parks District, that is just everyone synced up together for the kids, for the families. And so I feel like we come into this with a lot of momentum. And if anything, it is how do we actually coordinate a little better and know what each other is up to, and be able to really augment and harness that power. And so these three working groups, as you said, we've got career pathways as we're connecting, students from the small grades to the colleges to jobs and back and forth. And then right now it's focused on a healthcare career pathway, and we actually have some healthcare career academies in some of our high schools so far. And how do we take that and expand it, and how we maybe even take it into different workforces as well. We have affordable housing and trying to get everyone's head around what that could look like, and hopefully build something at some point there. I'm really involved with our procurement group, in part because part of my work with the district has been with community inclusion in our public works and capital projects. Being a school district with 30,000 students, we actually have a lot of leverage there with our bond money, which we have been passing $500 million bonds over the last few years. So we have a lot of capital to play with and really enforce. And when I started this work, the community basically said, hey, if you want us to invest in you with us bond money, how are you investing in us? And it was a really good question, because at the time, our local inclusion as far as contracting on public works projects was only at about 10%. I think we had a goal of 15% at that time, and we weren't even hitting that. And our certified minority and women contracting was maybe 2% total. And they were like, this is not you investing in us. And so we ended up putting together a plan at the district level, and I'll bring this into Anchor in a moment too. But as far as okay, we're going to up that to at least 30% local. We're going to reflect state goals as far as 10% minority and 6% women and 5% for small business, as well as looking at apprenticeships and building that future workforce as well. And what does that look like? And working over the time, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but we currently are seeing easily over 40%, if not often 70% local investment. And that minority and women-owned businesses goals has gone from that 2% total to sometimes 20-25% on projects, if not more. And there's a lot of different ways we've done that, but it's being intentional and looking at our community and this is us investing in you, and removing those barriers, talking to the people involved, talking to the big contractors, the middle, the small, the micro businesses, and trying to get everyone involved and remove barriers and make connections along the way. And so that was my launch into some of the Anchor Network conversations once upon a time, and how we've been able to use our lessons learned to help other people. And it's to the point now that other people are being able to also then use their lessons learned, because not everyone has a $500 million bond, So we've got our lever, but then what does the Parks District have? You guys have a lot of smaller projects, but a lot more capacity to do some intricate outreach into the community and working with those businesses and hand-holding and finding and connecting on the tiny projects that can then connect to the medium projects. And how do we get that to be more of a connection between all of us? We have the city that has their equity index. They also have the study as far as disparity study. So they've been able to identify what are the businesses that are out there in the community that we know who to tap, and not just I've heard of so-and-so, but to be able to better target the areas where there are different small businesses, minority, women, disadvantaged businesses, and be able to target that work in that way and really get more people involved. They also have started being able to workforce on some of their projects. They have requirements to hire within the zip code that project is. So starting to implement some of those practices And then as we have those discussions, even as we're talking with hospitals and universities or private organizations, we're like, well, we don't have that capacity. It's like, well, what do you have? And they're starting to look at their purchasing. And even those who are like, well, we're kind of, we can't really do that with purchasing. But then they're like, well, we do have sustainability policies. How do you start to mirror those sustainability policies and start to put that into equity? And they're starting to explore that. And it keeps going. And I really love that our anchor network is a little bit scrappy and grassrootsy, and that it evolves. So it started out as one thing, but as we're having these conversations, we're having these ahas within our group, which George got to be there for the last one when he brought his dining services director or director of hospitality. Anyways, I remembered her from 30 years ago. It was a little weird. But he brought her, and as I'm like, oh man, I'm helping lead this procurement conversation. I'm like, how do I connect to her? And then I have an aha moment, because in my role, I'm also very involved with our nutrition services department and had a lot of change management there. And we're in the midst of trying to look into having a central kitchen. And we have 30,000 students, so we have a lot of leverage. They've got 3,000 students. They want to make a difference. But what if we all combine forces? And between our central kitchen and maybe being able to do things with storage and warehouse and all that, even before there's a physical building of something, there's the what we can do with our combined influence. So again, that anchor impact, collaborative impact of, oh, what if we put together and went out to farmers and diverse farmers and women-owned for small business farmers and said, hey, how can we support you? And we commit to you. And especially coming out of this pandemic and having supply chains all over the place. And it's been a definite eye-opener to what does a sustainable economy look like? How do we support our local economy so that even things are down, we've got some circulation going, but then also in that survival state of like, okay, where are warehouses if an emergency happens? And it's getting us to think big and think together. And I'm excited about some of what the future brings, which leads me to pass you over then to George.
Thank you. My name is George Zeno. I'm the Associate Vice President for Community Advancement at Pacific Lutheran University. We are located just south of the city of Tacoma in unincorporated Pierce County. But before I start, I just want to say I am honored to be here at the Nutter, being at an event hosted by the Nutter Center. I've been a huge fan of the work here, and just honored to be here and the work that you're doing, as well as the folks that I have. It's primarily because I've been in higher education, or in education to say, for almost 30 years, nearly all of it in philanthropy, and being typically the only one that looks like me in the field, and doing anchoring work at research universities, right? So had the pleasure of opening up the first Equitable and Justice Center for Philanthropy at a R1 research university at the University of Washington, and understanding what restorative justice and healing looks like in our community and what that can do. And it was the Nutter Center that really got me understanding how my sector of philanthropy had conditioned me to see service and what they believe democratic goals should be structured and designed around. And so that Nutter Center helped me really understand, really to look at the world a little bit differently, and how do you co-design with your community. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here at the Nutter Center, and thank you for the gift that you continue to share with learning, because that's the critical component here. So thank you. As well as the folks at Augsburg University, which is also one of our sister Lutheran universities. They have an amazing center for democracy and citizenship there, and we continue to look at them as a model as well. So I just want to say thanks to that. So I lead community advancement work at Pacific Lutheran University, and we're in Pierce County. So I'm the reality check on the ground. That's what I like to say here, because the conditions of our environments are real and they're changing rapidly. We are in Pierce County. Pierce County is I like to call it a red line county, where the city of Tacoma pretty much excluded Native Americans, which is actually the highest percentage of Native Americans in our state, in this particular area, from the city borders, or a perception of the city borders. So we have a tribal community to the north of us that sits right on the Tacoma city line. We have a tribal community to the south of us. The one in the north is urbanized, They have no hunting, gathering space. It's all urbanized. The one to the south of us is more rural. And both of them face a number of different challenges. And so we also have urban, shoreline, suburban, foothill, rural, and mountain communities, all within 30 minutes. And so they all have different public health needs, and so on. The reality on the ground for us is that we have school districts that at 2000 census report had 80% white students, and they're pretty much down to 24 to 27%, 20 years later. Faculty hasn't changed, policies haven't changed, and so on. Those are some of the challenges we face. We also have the 4th largest military base in the world next to us, to our campus, 125,000 people associated with that base. So we have community members that move frequently and need to be reestablished, with partners or spouses that can't qualify to work in our communities because of licensing and challenges like that. Of course, like everyone else, we have labor issues. And so trying to understand how you stack these pain points that are coming about to solve these problems together is a critical part of this anchor opportunity that we have. And those are the things that we're looking at. So as Alicia was saying, they have health academies in the high schools. Well, we have community wellness programs that we're bringing into their communities, and we're going to hire professional staff for those things. But what about an intergenerational model where we have professionals coming back to the colleges going back to the high schools going back to middle and elementary schools to network together to solve these problems? That's root thinking for me. That's where I grew up. Small village in Louisiana. You take care of your people, and we work as a village. And being democratic anchors allows us to do that work. A couple of things that we're working at PLU. We're a university, so we think ourselves as a teaching and learning university. So we go out in community, we learn from the community. We change our curriculum to match that. We hire faculty that we try to be as representative of the community as possible. And then we think about what more can we do with our community. So we've actually moved our philanthropy, or we're moving, that's my new job in a new university relations, to more of a collective impact model around philanthropy. So we're starting a capital campaign where we're actually, instead of going to the deans, which is typical of what universities do, and asking them for their wish list, we actually go to the community and we listen and listen and listen. And then we translate that back to our faculty, we map it back to their scholarship, and then we go to our students and we listen to them, and we listen and we listen. We have about 75% of our student body comes from our region. We're just about to become a majority university, which is pretty amazing because we are an immigrant Norwegian Lutheran university, where English was very much a second language for a number of years. And so we have quite a bit of change even at our university. So one of the things that we would hope from an anchor institution system is understanding how do we develop a new first language, a first language that's around democratic system building. And that's that intergenerational concept of going back to your elders, to your young folks, and your young folks to your elders, and understanding what language that we need to build together to really understand each other, because we have nuances in language that keeps us separated, though we could be talking about the same outcome. And I still see it in businesses. We have businesses who are launching programs who are saying like, yeah, we're for collaboration, we're for this, and they're doing stuff by themselves. Some of them belong to our own network and they're doing it. And some of that is because it might be too late for some of us. Let's be for real. And so what does it mean for us to understand the development of the pipeline? I love the fellows program concepts I've heard so far. That's that intergenerational learning. that we need to focus on and develop. So those are some of the things that we're going to be working on together as a network, is understanding how we can build the capacity of each other through innovative practices, through collaborating around strategic outcomes, and being intentional around what we design. We have a critical issue around attention. There's some new scholars who are talking about how algorithms are now colonizing our brains around attention. So what does that mean for us in the future about unplugging our community so they can be plugged into each other? That's the biggest hurdle I think we have coming up, is getting people's attention, because we can't get to democratic goals without that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you to both the Central Corridor Anchor Partnership and the Tacoma Anchor Network. We intentionally wanted to have a smaller scale meeting so we'd have opportunity for exchange. So I'm down on the floor and I've got my mic and I want to pass it around. And so those of you who have questions, comments, anything you want to put on the floor, please let's see your hands. Depending on how many hands they are, we may take some in bundles. So let's go over. Any other hands? All right, just one. So we'll hear from you, Harvey.
This is typically a precedent question, but the bond issue, who bonded you? The city, the county? $500 million is not insignificant.
So our school district, we are our own government organization. So we have city, we have parks, we have school district as our own separate taxing. So it is a school district bond.
And one of the things about where we live, it's, I grew up in North Carolina. I was a reporter in Harrisburg here for a year, and then moved out west. Our governance is so much different in the West Coast than it is on the East Coast. They put power closer and closer to the people. And so, the voters approved the school bonds. We have a $200 million capital bond that voters approved in the Park District. So collectively, we're spending $700 million to build stuff in our community, which like Tacoma rocks, right? I can see that.
I have a question here. Hi, Tony Sorrentino from Penn. This was a great panel. Thank you very much. Question for all of you. Paul, you said something. I want to start with you. Individual organizations, individual anchors with metrics and goals around procurement and hiring and whatnot. Did the collaborative inspire people to develop metrics, or were the institutions already setting metrics and you were trying to stitch it all together? I'm just kind of curious the process or the phasing.
Yeah, I have to say that I think probably most of the institutions in the partnership from the beginning were not measuring those kinds of things. And so it wasn't, and let me tell you, it was not easy. I mean, anybody who's done it, if you're part of the larger anchor framework, you know that you're being asked to do that. We're actually now moving, interestingly enough, we're about to partner with a group called the Wilder Research folks. We're going to bring in people with expertise in research, because the problem is individual institutions, systems, we're different. It was apples and oranges in terms of some of this. And so we're hoping to develop, 3 or 4 key metrics that we will track on, and then bring a framework. We've seen this happen. We have a Strive, K-12 Strive program, which has partnered. And so we're modeling what we're going to do after what happened with that effort, where they were really able to bring school districts together and find ways to, to partner. So around research. So that would be, and it was like pulling teeth, as you can imagine, to try to get it. And, the poor consultant who runs the thing was out there, chasing people down, and did a pretty good job. But ultimately, more work and more confusion probably than anything else.
Okay, we have a couple more questions.
David, if I could, I want to
Yeah,
jump
okay,
in,
all right.
because I was actually, Tony, I was thinking about you this morning, and I've been, as I said, I've been participating in this quarterly meeting, and I've heard you talk about you wanting to learn from all these established networks as Philadelphia creates one, and I made a note and I forgot to say it. We started with about a dozen of us meeting monthly, and establishing that mission. And it was all executive level folks. But we're not the doers, right? And so the thing that I'm most excited about this year is these 3 work groups. So Marcy and Abigail, y'all don't need to know them, but Marcy and Abigail work for Metro Parks. They work in our planning and contracting area, and they have joined the procurement work group, and they're super excited about this. And they're working with Alicia, and they're starting to define. One of the first things they did was a scan of what are your goals, how are you measuring, which processes. So there's a couple different choices you can take, and so which method are you using, and so we're getting there. And what I wanted you to hear was we started with executives sort of dreaming, what is this thing going to be and what do we want to do? And I was sort of waiting to see when does it click? When does something happen where now the staff is engaged? And that's happening now.
And just to briefly and directly answer your question, the district came with specific metrics, and we've had ours, and then that's helped inspire the conversation with the other members is about what metrics are suitable for them and how they look at it. And we've also worked at a lot of common definitions. So we're trying to speak the same language around procurement and contracting, especially as we're reaching out to the community who's confused by your roster and your roster and your roster. And what are your methods and your methods and your methods? So even if we have different goals and maybe some different requirements, trying to speak the same language. So we're aligning on that now.
I might just quickly get to David, but the governance has evolved for us too, because we started with everybody at the table and it was primarily the leadership. We pretty quickly realized those meetings, we weren't getting a lot done. So we actually created an executive committee. So there's 4 of us on the executive committee. We meet every month. And then we actually formed the implementation group. So that actually, I mean, to your point, that getting the folks involved who actually, know what they're doing. When it comes to, things like working with Sodexo on food. I mean, for heaven's sakes, I don't know anything about that, but my, for dining service person knows. And so to get those folks at the table is really critical. Yeah.
Hi, I'm David Scobie, bringing theory to practice. Again, thanks for the panel. It was really enlightening. I was really grateful at the end that you mentioned collective impact, because I was thinking about that listening to Nancy's 3.0 typology and wondering if the anchor institutions idea and the collective impact practice are converging on one another. It seems to me one of the things I value about collective impact as a model is this very strong stress on collective agenda setting. In other words, not assuming you know what the problems are before you convene people together. And I wonder how you, and I'd also be interested in hearing from Nancy and David and everyone else, how you think about agenda setting, and underneath that, whether what we're developing is our own version of a collective impact model.
This for me, the question. Oh, sure. Well, I can start. So I've actually been in collective work for 20 something years. And I have to say that the most of the failures of collectives is the learning part. And that is learning from the community. And then how do you translate that back to institutional effectiveness of your own organization versus looking directly at a target and only changing their condition? That's the greatest failure of the collectives. And so this anchor institutions that's focusing on eds and meds really helps with the anchoring of learning. I think that's what PLU is trying to figure out. And even as our collective, as a university of capital campaigns, is really trying to understand how you translate all this from the community's needs into our institutional effectiveness, right? So what are we doing with our admissions policy? What are we doing with our financial aid policy? What are we doing with our internships, experiential learning? All those components now should be intentionally designed for impact versus what we've always done. And so setting the community's agenda is challenging because there's so many different agendas. And so being intentional around where people are, where organizations are in their life cycle, how they're looking at the world right now is our most important aspect. One of the things I appreciate about this group and to being in Tacoma really is because we are a small city, county area. And like Tacoma Public Schools and PLU have been partners for 130 years. So what does that mean? It's not just we're here and we're coming and going. No, we're here. So what does it mean to really be an anchor and continue to be a partner to those agendas. You know, we had a community wellness program coming into our community. That's a product, right? We're here. These are our people. So we need to make sure as an education, as a future healthcare employer provider, that we are being explicit about how we are designing and developing for generational change based off of those agendas.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say, just in terms of some of the ways it looks in practice with the Tacoma Anchor Network, I think we're unwavering in our values and principles and kind of this long-term vision, but the particular details of what we're doing, we're holding them very loosely because it's changing all of the time. And so as we were talking about the 3 pillars of the network around procurement and investment in affordable housing and hiring, we realized we'd been meeting over Zoom for a year, and it's like, this is a little too abstract. So we got it, the network hadn't met together in person since, the end of 2019. And so we had our first in-person gathering of, the executives who'd been in conversation, some of the staff members who were kind of newer to the conversations. And we met in April of this year for the first time in over 2 years, just to see what would happen in these groups and how our learning and our understanding of the problem shaped up. And from there, that gave us some really rich material to work with as we went back into virtual and just defining ideas. And then we met again in September. And the 3 working groups had a lot more concrete stuff to work together. And we're actually talking about, how do we start to prototype ideas or brainstorm what a housing development might look like? And so we're moving forward, but every time we get together, it's like we don't have to be beholden to the idea we had last month because we've learned a lot since then. So I think being comfortable with being iterative, returning to the same questions over and over, because each time you're getting a layer deeper as you learn more and bring more people to the table. That's part of the process for us too, the agenda as it evolves.
Can I just add one more thing? I forgot that to say that the community agenda building, I think what the critical part of the community agenda building is translating those outcomes, because we have, the largest Black community in the whole state. We have the largest Native American population in the whole state, in our region. Black liberation and Native sovereignty have way more in common for outcomes, but people won't know it unless people lived experiences are at the table translating and guiding and helping to create that first language, shared first language together. That's the critical part of the common agenda, because our community agenda, because if not, then people are again isolating their perceptions, their imagination without interconnections.
Everyone, we see 1, 2, 2. So we're gonna take you 2 together, if you don't mind. And because I'm just watching our time. So we're gonna hear 2. So take notes as you're hearing these questions, and then we'll turn it back to the panel, and then we'll close this panel and take a break. Here we go.
Thank you. Barbara George Johnson with Kane University, John S. Watson Institute for Urban Policy Research. I just have, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your intentional way that you presented that information. And I love the approach of intergenerational engagement. I think that's critical. My 2 brief questions. 1, school resources connected to property tax in any way? Just want to know from Jersey, trying to understand that because it's a major issue. So I'd love to know what you all are doing in terms of all those wonderful bonds and so forth, and how that's connected in terms of resources. And then 2, eds and meds, getting it sort of moving in the right direction. What's going on with other corporations, your ITs, your communication corporations, your utilities, as they try to engage or should be engaging more with K through 12 and then community colleges and colleges.
Okay, thank you. And now our final question, comment?
All right, real quickly. My name is Charles Ireland. I'm with Mainline Health. And my question is more for Hunter. That equity index, I'd like to learn a little bit more about it, how you implement that, and the receptivity for organizations such as ours, healthcare organization, hospitals. How were they receptive to that, and how did they implement it? Because it seems like if it's not required, why do it? You know what I mean? How do we make it valuable to an organization?
All right, I'll start with what I can as far as the property taxes and the bonds, as we definitely, it is tied to property taxes, and we work as we do our bonds to whenever we have a new bond to keep it at a level so that we're not increasing the tax rate, which can still, of course, increase overall taxes a little bit, but making sure we're keeping that tax rate even over time. And that's how we plan our bonds. And so every few years we have this big bump, but we're looking at the impact on that rate as well to ensure we're not overwhelming people, because we know that there's resistance to that. So we try, that's the palatable, try to keep it a rate, though we do have a really supportive community too, but also showing that value add to them. We do a lot of partnerships. And I know right now there's talking with the city as well as probably Metro Parks, if they haven't been told yet, of like, how do we look at our bonds in a way that is collaborative? Hope you know that. Guess what? But definitely looking at that value add, safety, security, what's in it for the community. There's a lot, we look at our schools as community centers and try to keep them open and operating and part of the community almost, all day long. There's a lot of community groups that are there. Metro Parks is in there all the way. So really making them centers of the community and not just schools. So they see the value in it, but then also that geeky side of let's keep it at an even keel so we don't freak anyone out. On that one. And I'll let Hunter and others talk about the equity index, but I will say that the disparity study on that they've done, we use that in order to, the city uses it at least in order to show where they need to, they can actually put requirements on some of their diverse hiring because of the disparity study, because they can show there's a need. So by law in Washington state, we're not allowed to do a lot of things mandated, but that allows them to mandate some things and not just guilt trip people like I do.
And I'll add, I think an important piece of context on the tax question, we don't have an income tax. So we're primarily funded through property taxes and sales taxes. And so everybody's used to that. And that's what funds all of our governments. On the equity index, and actually before I get to equity index, also on sort of investment on that question. So Alicia, the school district and the park district have been dreaming for years. Her superintendent and my executive director have been dreaming for years about building a joint maintenance facility and then teaching the trades, like turning that into an innovative school. We have our trades folks at the park district are in a 100-year-old building that they have to use porta potties because the stuff doesn't work in the building. And her folks are similarly situated. So they've got a few $1 million set aside. They could build something. We have a few $1 million. We were planning on building something. What if we pulled that together? Which, this is the thing where in the government world, that's like, whoa, this is mine. Right. And so this is where Tacoma is really trying to break through that. And what if we invest in this together and build a joint facility and again, use that facility to teach the trade. So that's something that we're pretty excited about, or something we want to do. We haven't been able to identify the site yet because of our unique needs. On the equity index, so it's so new, not many people are using it yet. But I'll give you an example how the city is using it, and Metro and the school district, I think, are starting to use these things. We feel like as we show them how we're using it, they'll see that value. The city's my favorite example that they use of several. They only have so much money. They have 1 million streetlights, and then they can't possibly replace every one of them. So they use that index, they use that metric and determine, okay, we have this much money to invest in new streetlights this year. We're going to put them in this neighborhood and this neighborhood and this neighborhood. So they're using that index to decide how and where to make their investments. We're doing the same at Metro as we spend that bond money to make improvements in parks and things like that. So that's, and then again, kind of the holy grail to me. I met last week with one of the two health systems. It's Virginia Mason Franciscan Health, and they're part of the Common Spirit group. And so they're a national guy from Common Spirit came to Tacoma last week because he wanted to hear about the Anchor Network, and which got me excited because that means Franciscan or Virginia Mason Franciscan. They've been merging, so their name keeps getting longer. But that means this guy's got our local guy has national support. And so we're excited about that. And he talked about how they only have national data. And he said, and that's not going to serve us very well because it just spreads too thin across the whole system. And so I think they're excited about seeing what we have. I haven't, we got to figure out how to get them to see the utility in that index.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much again to our panelists. Incredibly stimulating panel. And so we're going to now move to a break. You know, we're a little bit behind schedule. So like I said at the beginning, we're going to end at 3 o'clock. So we'll just make up here and there. We're going to start our next panel at 11:50. Now, you notice that we have teams of presenters, and that was by design. So in this work, we're not only trying to get a single representative talking about this work, we want you to hear from multiple different types of anchor institutions from their communities. So we are thinking about being mutually transformative of anchor institutions and think about what this means to different fields. Anyway, enjoy your break. Please come back in time for our 11:50 panel on racial equity. Our two anchor partnerships on our racial equity panel. And first, we're going to hear from the Newark Anchor Collaborative, which is a very exciting partnership in New Jersey, which happens to be very close to some of the work we do at the Anchor Institutions Task Force. You will find on our website of the Anchor Institutions Task Force a comprehensive case story of the evolution of the Newark Anchor Collaborative, and also you will get some further information about this. But if you want to mark your calendars, on March 9th, we're going to do a webinar to kind of accompany that case study and go deep into that particular experience. So sometimes we feature a single anchor partnership with some depth as well. So I'll turn it now to the Newark Anchor Collaborative.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. I am Shanae Harris, and I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague Diana, and we are happy and excited to share the work of the Newark Anchor Collaborative. We just wanted to note, our colleague Linda Harrison could not make it today because of a family emergency, but we'll make sure that we hopefully represent her ideas and her perspectives through our discussion. So our goal is to do two things. So I'll set up some history and context of NAC, how we got here, and talk a little about the racial equity framework that we've collectively worked on. And then Diana will talk a lot about, from her perspective, how we've been able to use this tool, in our respective institutions, but also how it's enhanced and augmented existing work. Because I think one of the takeaways is that, because we're all anchored in Newark, New Jersey, issues of race, issues of acknowledging the role that race plays in systemic barriers in the context of our community needs, is not a new idea. It's something that, many of us who do this work authentically have done for years. And I think the big difference is that there's an opportunity to do it collaboratively and more intentionally together. So just to give you some background and context of who I am, I lead social responsibility for Prudential Financial. So we have been anchored in Newark, New Jersey for almost 150 years. And interestingly enough, while we have operated as a company, as an anchor institution, particularly over the last 50 years since the Prudential Foundation and our social responsibility programs were formally established, we never said the word anchor. And I will say that a lot of that has been due to the learnings that we've had, that we kind of all throughout the company, we define ourselves as an anchor institution in Newark because of the leadership of Nancy Cantor. So, she has been one of the best additions to the city of Newark, and her leadership has really been felt throughout our community. So, we started, the Newark Anchor Collaborative really in response to the fact that we had a lot of new leaders, right, in anchor institutions around the city. So, and there was a leadership shift, not just in education, but in arts and culture. And many of us said, how could we more intentionally work together and to, take all the individual work that we have been doing as institutions for years and say, how do you apply almost a collective action approach to that work? So NAC has about 18 anchor institutions, and we are diverse. We go beyond the traditional eds and meds. We have corporations like Prudential and Audible as part of the network. We have cultural arts institutions, and we have representation from all our universities, but also our utility company. So, we've brought in the traditional definition of what an anchor institution means to frame and focus on institutions in Newark that have embraced the values of what does it mean to be in place, and what does it mean to be collectively working on what we would say is around inclusive economic growth. So, NAC was born at a time when there was a tremendous amount of new investment coming into the city of Newark, and which was exciting for all of us, being a part of a place that has had such decades of disinvestment. But there was also a lot of concern, I think, in terms of saying, how are we intentional about making sure that economic growth in the city was done through an inclusive lens, that it helped, that if done in an intentional way, it could benefit Newark residents rather than displace them. And, that was another kind of lens that really helped to galvanize all the anchor institutions that came together. I'll add two more points. The anchor institutions were all a part of an organization that existed, an intermediary organization called the Newark Alliance, which was a broader collection of businesses and industries and anchor institutions that work together in the city. So in many ways, the Newark Anchor Collaborative had a natural place to grow and nurture and be nurtured through the Newark Alliance. And it was a natural seat because we were all working collectively indirectly, but NAC allowed us to be a lot more intentional. Just a few more points about, just the work of NAC and some of the initial things. So we were established around 2017 formally. and really came around, you know, a campaign that our mayor Raz Baraka had at the time, which was really to focus on how do we support local procurement, how do we help more of our employees and residents stay and remain in the city of Newark, and how do we, and this was the culminating kind of work, how do we hire more Newark residents, you know, by anchor institutions so that they could actually be employed and have access to quality employment in the city. And that came out of a report in a study that was done that said only 18% of Newark residents actually worked in the city. So it was a city that had a lot of large employers like Prudential and Rutgers and others, RWJ Barnabas, and most of the workers actually lived in the neighboring suburbs. So we made a pledge commitment that we would work collectively on some targeted goals in all three of those areas. And I'm really happy to say that we actually exceeded our targets, particularly on local hiring, which, you know, it felt like an ambitious goal at the time to hire 2,000 Newark residents, you know, through the Anchor Collaborative collectively. So making sure that we're looking at talent pipelines and actually supporting those residents, you know, through hiring of our institutions. But we actually exceeded that number by 2020. So fast forward to 2020, which, you know, don't have to explain what that year looked like for all of us. But, you know, I think that, you know, the opportunity for NAC was that it sharpened the discussion and created an opportunity for us to say, how does a racial equity lens and a framework to all the collective work that we were doing, how does that fit in the equation? And I think it was an organic progression to one, existing work that many of us had done to say, how do we start to center the work that we're doing in Newark, not around hire, live, buy local strategies, but around having a racial equity lens to everything that we do. And also, what does that mean for the community impact that we were working collectively to achieve? But also, what does it mean for the institutional change and the internal conversation that needed to occur in order to really sustain the work? That in turn led to us saying one of the first things that we should do collectively in response to that was to create a framework or a tool that would allow us to measure our success, both in terms of community impact, but also in terms of, you know, what is happening in terms of change institutionally? How are we doing on hiring diverse talent? You know, what is, you know, the landscape look like in terms of our internal structure and our communications on this work? And then how does that internal change work ultimately drive the community impact that we're looking to do? So I'll pause there and have my colleague Diana talk a little about her reflections on how this work has unfolded. And I will say, one of the things I've appreciated about RWJ Barnabas is in 2017, they were sharing, right? The work that they were doing in this area. So they have been early adopters in having tools and metrics, and so she'll have great insights on how this new tool is helping us move along this journey.
All right, can folks hear me? Great, good morning. Diana Candelejos. So I am the Assistant Vice President of Economic Inclusion at RWJ Barnabas Health. And my role is unique in that we sit in the social impact and community investment team. And that team really looks to address the social determinants of health. And so why that is important, especially with this collaborative, the Newark Anchor Collaborative, is that we do have cross-sector partnerships with different industries. And so that's important for us because we know, again, that where you live, work, and play matter, and the arts matter, and financial literacy matter, and and education. And so all our partners play a role, and they are the subject matter experts in that space. And so us as a healthcare provider, we're very, proud and committed to being at this table. As Shanae said, in 2017, we actually adopted Race Forward's, right, racial equity tool, and we were using it to actually distribute mini grants. When it came to social impact interventions, we want to make sure that we were being equitable in the selection of community partners and also the intention and impact of the actual projects as it relates to our goals. And so we had done it for that, and then we had also used it for our local hiring efforts. I myself am actually a proud beneficiary of the Newark 2020 program that Shanae just spoke about. I was actually the first hire. And so I was very, keen on making sure that we were adopting a racial equity lens to our local hiring and upskilling practices at RWJ Barnabas Health. So with that context, we did end up sharing that tool to the Newark Anchor Collaborative. And, there were others similarly using different renditions of their tools to do their work. And so there was the development of this racial equity work group or committee to first share, some of those best practices, as well as collecting a lot of research on different models before the creation of our own. And so all of those things really informed, and thank you, Marga, also for facilitating, and helping us develop this tool that has helped us. It's really a self-reflective tool. It is an assessment that actually helps us benchmark where we are. As I said, we're all doing work already in this space in different phases. And so this really helps us see where we're at and also where the gaps are. Because the other thing is I could be measuring, health outcomes and very specific things and local hiring in a certain way. But this tool really allows us to see, where we're all at as it relates to these indicators that we are all in agreement with. I also think it's unique, the tool, in that it's not just about diversity, it's not an assessment or an audit that just looks at diversity and inclusion. It's really looking at, okay, so what are those positions folks are being placed at? Let's look at power dynamics. Let's look at what are you doing to communicate the work and really listen to the people that are most impacted by your interventions. And so we're going into that, infrastructure, those practices that are necessary, and also the policies for this work to be sustainable, because it's not about just hitting a target a year and it's done. It's what have you done in the long term to sustain this work, and how as institutions are we transforming to become the anchors that we say that we are, because we're always going to be there, We're going to be anchors, I feel like, by default, just because of our large power and presence, but really it's how do we become equitable, not just diverse and inclusive. And so my experience, I will also add with sharing this tool internally was not too challenging. I think with the financial investments that really pushed us, to look at what percentage are we allocating. Granted, we have departments again with resources and budgets, but it was more so on the treasury and investment side to look at. So that was a bit of a challenge, but in terms of procurement, our procurement heads, our HR heads, and also diversity and inclusion representatives, they're very quick to provide, the responses and to gauge where we were in the assessment. And all of that said is that it's not easy. It was easy for us because of all the groundwork we had done in the past, because we had diversity and inclusion efforts. We already had employee resource groups. We already had a whole social impact department leading anchor work. And so it made it so that we had sort of the basic infrastructure to push us to the next level. I will say also that this was specifically for Newark Beth Israel Medical Center. So we are a large healthcare institution. And so a lot of the interventions as it relates to anchor work were in fact piloted in Newark. And so that's why it's the more mature hospital of the rest of the 12 hospitals that we have, and 4 children specialized. I think moving forward, we will be using this tool for the rest. That's my job, for the rest, to scale it to the rest of the institutions, facilities, but it will also, again, it'll depend on where they're at and sort of the infrastructure already in place in every hospital.
Yes, and the only thing, and thank you, Diana, I would add is, just to share a little about the results of the collective tool. So out of our 18 anchor partners in NAC, 11 actually used the tool, completed it, and sent in their survey results. And we were able to generate kind of a general report that had aggregate data. So it allows us a baseline to just see where are we collectively. We also we're able to have real conversations, right, in safe spaces about why some of the anchor institutions might have been hesitant to submit the report. You know, you can imagine, and I represent a very large Fortune 50 company, you know, the concerns about data and transparency and, you know, how to control that information. But we talked through how to use this tool. And I think, you know, the power of having such diverse anchors is that we were able to see the utility of the tool through the lens of different institutions. So Diana talked about how she applied it within her organization. For Prudential, we have a racial equity task force that was established in response to some commitments that the company made in 2020. And it has many of our senior leaders, some of the members of our executive leadership team on that task force. And we were able to introduce this tool as a conversation piece to say, how are we doing? So we had a lot of support and buy-in, and we'll continue to kind of utilize the tool year over year to align with the progress and, you know, the impact that we're already tracking as a company. But Linda, you know, coming from a smaller anchor institution, was really able to drive pretty much transformative change within her institution and organization. The Newark Museum of Art that has been around for many, many years, but has not always embraced the community, and particularly through a racial lens. So the diversity of the work and the ability to have a safe space to talk about some of the barriers has been invaluable through this process. We'd be happy to answer any questions later on, but I think we
Okay.
should pause there.
Thank you very much, Newark Anchor Collaborative. And now we'll turn to Near West Side Partners from Milwaukee.
The greatest place on earth. Thank you, everyone. It's been really inspiring to hear all the different ways anchor institutions are working across the country. And of course, to our hosts here at Penn, we're really grateful to be here. My name's Pat Kennelly. I'm the director of the Center for Peacemaking at Marquette, which is a research center focused on nonviolence and community building. I'm also almost 20-year resident of Milwaukee's Near West Side, and I think one of the few anchor employees before Near West Side Partners started to live in the neighborhood. For sake of expediency, I'll quickly introduce my colleagues up here, and then as they answer questions, they can provide a little more information about themselves. To my right is Keith Stanley, the executive director of Near West Side Partners. Rana Altenberg is next to Keith. She is our associate vice president for public affairs at Marquette, as well as the president of Near West Side Partners. And then Kelsey Otero is the director of innovation at Marquette and runs our 707 hub. All very talented individuals. But maybe Keith, we can start with you. Near West Side Partners started in 2015. Before we go into some of the work for racial equity and social change that you've helped lead, can you just paint a picture, give people context of what Near West Side Partners is, the area, and some key initiatives?
Thank you, Pat. I hope you guys are doing well today. Logan, I need a big favor from you, man. Can you take a few pictures if it's possible for me? Thanks, man. Appreciate it. And get up on our social media. Keith Stanley, Near West Side Partners Executive Director. It's good to see everyone. Good to be in Philly again. Ira, man, it was been a long time. Real quickly, I would say this. So I'm gonna tell a story. There's some pictures there on your table, a map. Thanks to our board president, Rana Altenberg, that you can kind of see some of the pictures as I try to tell this quick story. 2014, in light of really 20 years of seeing violent crime decrease, 2014 was a difficult, challenging time for not just the Near West Side in Milwaukee, but for across the country. We had a major incident occur across the street from Harley Davidson, and it was the domestic violence incident where one of the partner shot up in the air, bullet came down, landed on the window of Harley Davidson when they were actually interviewing somebody. that brought together the anchor institutions, Harley-Davidson, Molson Coors, Marquette University, Advocate Aurora Health was our largest private employer, health employer, and Potawatomi, PBDC, our largest gaming outfit in the state of Wisconsin. They have a business interest in the Near West Side. Brought everybody together through the context of Ronna Altenberg. We were able to hang out with Ira February 2015, I should say. I think it was through the 4th through the 6th. And I got my picture still here in my iPhone. And we really heard the story about UPN, what they were doing, how they were doing it. We received a copy of the book from the president at the time, who outlined some of the things they dealt with. But that didn't stop there. We went across the country. We had an opportunity to go to Indianapolis, Chicago, even in our own city to see what people were doing. And a couple of things we got out of that, and I'm gonna be brief so we can turn it over. And there's just a lot more than that. I ask you if you can, if you're interested, follow us on any of our social media. We have a lot of our storytelling there, cross collaboration, really embracing conflict of interest. That's something we actually believe in at the very beginning, being data driven, understanding the data of our community, of our residents, what that looks like. And once again, you can see that some of that in our book of what that data looks like. Neighborhood efficacy, empowering our residents, being a voice, making sure our residents have a voice at the table, like Ira has been saying about that democratic way of looking at things. The asset-based community development, I'm gonna stop right there. ABCD, asset-based community development. We don't lead with our foot, the wrong foot. We wanna lead with what are the assets in our community. And I think we learned that from professors at UW Stevens Point, I think, Ronna. And so we took all that and began to really develop a strategy, a key strategy on how do we engage our community, how do we listen to our community, but also how do we make sure they're all receiving the outcomes we want to regarding safety, housing, health, and commercial corridor development. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, so I think, one of the things that you did really well is when Near West Side Partners was created, part of the governance and staffing, Keith mentioned the 4 key areas. Near West Side intentionally staffed each of their working teams with a resident from the neighborhood. So giving residents a seat at the table right from the very beginning, as well as hiring a number of residents. And you've had some big wins in each of those 4 areas. But, from 2015, a lot's happened on the community and national level. Certainly, some of the inequities that were already there were deepened by COVID. There's been a reckoning around racial justice in our country. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, and maybe the whole panel, what you believe changed and how Near West Side Partners responded. I don't know who wants to take that one first.
I'm happy to start. Real quickly, the whole entire country world pivoted during COVID. And I think a couple of things we did in Near West Side. One, we made sure we still connected as a community-based organization. We connected with our residents. So we were still out there. We have ambassadors. They were still out there connecting. We also, as much as possible, did everything online. We had a monthly meeting at Harley-Davidson that we stopped doing, but then we were doing weekly webinars on our social media feeds, and we found that people were interested. We also found in that not only we had to get away from Zoom. Most of our brothers and sisters in that community were not using Zoom, but they were using Facebook Live. So we went to Facebook Live. So we said, hey, here's what's happening. We got this going on. We actually work with a lot of our brothers and sisters, those who were in public housing, who couldn't access the groceries and couldn't access the things they needed, toilet paper. Great, a quick 30-second story. We connected with our anchor institutions and we got the toilet paper. We got the soap, the detergent. That was something that we all can say that wasn't a part of, when we first started Near West Side, that we would do that. We work with Advocate Aurora Health to get face masks. We got that out to our businesses and things of that nature. So it was a big pivot for us, and we still keep some of that. So we're still doing a lot of social online media. It's been really robust for us. And so that's some of the things Near West Side Partner was able to do.
Jump in on a small business commercial corridor development standpoint. So as Pat mentioned, I run the Innovation Center at Marquette University. I primarily work with students, but at when Near West Side Partners was first formed, my boss was really supportive. And when we we talk about an asset-based approach to looking internally at what resources our university could commit. My office, our innovation center, Pat's office, Center for Peacemaking were two of those that really said, we have resources, we have skills, we have talents, we have students that we can be able to help support and accelerate some of the work that Near West Side Partners is doing. So one of the things that we looked at was that we mapped all of our commercial corridors and looked at the vacancy rate. And one of our corridors had a 60% vacancy rate at the time when Near West Side Partners started. We thought it'd be our hardest commercial corridor to revitalize. And because of the work of some of our small businesses that really saw a vision for what we were doing and joined us as believers in this movement, that was what our commercial corridor that actually transformed the quickest, to the surprise of everybody. It's Fleet Street. In order to do that, a couple of things that we did. One, we recognize that most job growth is not coming from our large organizations and institutions. It's going to come from the small businesses that exist within our neighborhood. Those small businesses were particularly committed to hiring local, which was a pleasant surprise to us. And so what we did to try and support them was, one, we launched a Shark Tank style pitch competition, as you can imagine, but it was at the local level. So I also run pitch competitions for our students. So there's no reason I couldn't take that knowledge and figure out how we could do the same, that intellectual resource and human capital, to be able to run something similar for our local small businesses. And we partnered then with a lot of our smaller businesses in the area. We have an architecture firm that gave pro bono services. I got our law and entrepreneurship clinic on board from Marquette University to provide pro bono services. So we looked anywhere we could that we could find someone that really believed in what we were doing and could donate back. So we give our winner $10,000 cash, but all of our winners to date have said it's actually the pro bono services that they get, that they have a resource, a network, and a connection, someone to go to when they're like, I don't know how to do this. That has been incredibly beneficial and helpful. We've run this competition 5 times now. 4 out of our 5 winners have been Black entrepreneurs, and 3 out of the 5 have been women. So this has been a tremendous opportunity for us to bring smaller businesses to the Near West Side and be able to support them through those efforts. So I would say that the small businesses re-looking at the neighborhood and us saying, how do we fill in gap financing? How do we connect you with other resources? How do we then connect you back to the purchasing departments at our universities so that you understand the pipeline, understand how to work with them? One of the biggest surprises for me of late has been Sodexo, which is our food vendor at Marquette University, and how they have gotten on board and wanted to help support these small businesses that are in the neighborhood. And giving funds and resources out too. So the momentum that we slowly built as we had these small wins, others started to say, I like what you're doing, and I've convinced my organization or my department that this is something that we should be part of and doing more. And that's a lot because of the work Ron and Keith really encouraged us to all do, is get out there and be telling the story about what we're doing and make space for others to be able to join.
I'll just add, it's not easy to have a university, an Indian tribe, a motorcycle company, a brewery, and a hospital all work together in 7 different neighborhoods. And as Pat and Keith mentioned, we came together really out of crisis, and we didn't want to just, waste the crisis. We wanted to, we knew we couldn't police our way to prosperity. Certainly we had to address the safety issues, and there was nothing we could do without addressing the safety issues. Like, that was first. But concurrently, we did all of these other things. And I think the lesson that we learned right away was, if we were going to have resident engagement and have buy-in, we as anchors had to trust each other. And we had to find ways to demonstrate that we were trusting each other. Harley never let anyone play in their sandbox. They kind of still don't, but they're a great partner. And, but they opened their doors to the community meetings that they were like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. You just never knew what was going on in there, but it was so cool to have our monthly meetings there. Molson Coors, the brewery has, they're in Miller Valley, and they have this beautiful holiday lights celebration. And everybody from the city and around the community comes to see the holiday lights celebration, yet the neighborhood residents never were invited. So then they had a special day for neighborhood residents and school kids. It's awesome. So I do think establishing trust amongst the anchors, bringing in the other stakeholders, that all 5 of us said yes to doing this partnership, that we had Keith, and we built off of the neighborhood organization that really the Marquette neighborhood was in, and we extended it to 7 neighborhoods instead of 1. I know the chancellor had mentioned earlier this morning that, we had 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. We started with 1.0. Marquette had its own partnership with itself, and the neighborhood, but but we had to do it ourselves. Nobody would work with us. So we had to fix that. But it was 1 anchor and 1 part of 1 neighborhood. And it was successful in stabilizing, this is in the 90s, stabilizing the area and consolidating the campus and stuff like that. Then I think when we did Near West Side Partners, we jumped to 3.0 and had 5 anchors and 7 neighborhoods and shared goals. And then I think now we're implementing 2.0 with the equity lens. I think we all talked about this before we got up here. I think it was inherent. We assumed it, but it wasn't as intentional. So now in each of our strategic goals, everything is looked at through the equity lens. So.
And Rana, you bring up a good point of how we jumped to 3.0. To paint a little more context, in the booklets that are on the table, if you look at that map across the 7 neighborhoods, Milwaukee, like a lot of cities, is hyper segregated, but the 7 neighborhoods actually reflect the racial demographics of Milwaukee within a few percentage points. And if you look at historical census data, the area was becoming more segregated because of a declining population, because it really was a neighborhood of last resort for a lot of folks who were living there. And I think that what the pandemic, one of the silver linings, is it really helped build trust by showing the important role that anchor institutions play in the neighborhood, whether it was the hospitals literally caring for people, or some of the bigger corporations providing those rental assistance grants and other things. And then of course, the racial justice movements, like Rana alluded to, each individual anchor was examining their policies. But one of the unique things that Near West Side Partners did in each of the 5 anchors is sign on and put into their strategic planning process the specific role to convene the community to drive racial equity. And when we've surveyed and running the research center that tracks all this, that's not very common for a lot of anchor institutions to get everyone to sign on for that convening and implementing role. And so I don't know if you all could talk about the lessons learned, maybe some of the fabulous fails along the way, and how that implementation's going.
I'll be happy to start. I would just say, I think at least one of the fails, don't laugh at us, you guys, was we thought going to the traditional groups that most communities would have would be effective. Let's go to the churches, let's go to the schools, let's connect everybody together. That wasn't the case. So the churches, 80% of the, 90%, I think, of the church population didn't live in the community. So let's go to the schools. Well, we have out of 13 schools, 6 are high performing. 80% of the kids and families came outside of the community. So literally we had to spend time going door to door with our ambassadors, working with our community members, creating platforms for people to be engaged. We created that inroads. We created the ability to have, so people now look to Near West Side, can you pull together the community? Yeah. We need 200-300 people to discuss something, we can do it. But that was one of our fails at the very beginning. We just knew we could traditionally go to these churches and these schools. I think some of the successes, though, when it goes back to this equity lens, and then I pass the mic here, is that having that commitment from the top. out of all the groups and cities and that are represented today, for us, that was key in having our CEOs. Dr. Lovell, we were just talking about this a few minutes ago when we came to see Ira. That was the C-suite people from our anchor institutions coming to UPenn in 2015 to talk about what we wanted to do. And that is so key. If you don't have the commitment from the top, you don't have them physically there involved, I think that becomes challenging because then the people that I work with and quite frankly sometimes represent are like, well, you're saying it, Keith, but where are the people? And I think that was key for us.
I think one thing for us, and this kind of builds off of what Keith is saying, is so one big win is really looking at how we get all of the anchors involved around specific projects. So for me on Commercial Corridor, Harley was the initial group that funded our Rev Up pitch competition. And so they really got behind it. Now we started working with Molson Coors on a new program called Tap the Future to specifically fund and invest in BIPOC small business owners. It's cash, it's last cash in, it's close to opening. When you have all these unanticipated expenses, we want to make sure you can successfully open. But in doing all of this, other things that we recognized is that other partners who weren't necessarily in the community, but that were supporting our small businesses, were so focused on maybe helping them to just get open that somewhere in translation, a lot of just basic operating opportunities were really lost. And as of late, one of the things that I've been struggling with is we've had a couple of entrepreneurs, not necessarily in the Near West Side, but that were referred to us, and we asked if we could help, that didn't realize they had to pay taxes. And so we're doing a lot of triage on the back end. We had an entrepreneur who wanted to move into the Near West Side who's been operating a business for a couple of years. And so I had said I would be happy to meet with you. Didn't know that they need to have a seller's agreement through the state. So a lot of things that I think we take for granted, that we recognized a lot of individuals that have great ideas and great businesses. You don't know what you don't know. And unless this is outlined and someone's really walking with you, we can put money and invest in these businesses, and we're actually doing a huge disservice. So we're actually going back to the drawing board. One of the mentors in my office, he's retired, but he tells me this is his preferment. This is how he wants to spend his time. The two of us are mapping out some flow charts and pulling from institutions across. We realize there's fragments of pieces of everything that is built that we need. It is not in a centralized location that makes it easy and understandable for any entrepreneur that is opening up in the neighborhood. So we're working with Near West Side partners and going back to the drawing board as we continue to bring new small businesses in to say, what do we know that we took for granted that was just up here from our own experiences that we need to make sure we document and make very clear and helpful. So as that rolls out, I'm happy to share some of that information with you guys if that'll be helpful. Obviously, the state and local context will be a little bit different, but a lot of it is going to be similar across different communities. So continuing to rethink, I think that's one thing, that this organization is agile, and as we continue to grow, we look at how we evolve and what services are missing, what gaps. And so health equity was one when we first started, was not a big priority because there were other things we had determined were the top priorities at that time. And so we go back to the drawing board and reinvent and relook at things. And that's part of what keeps all of our programming fresh and relevant and close to those that need to be served.
I'll just add a little bit. When we convened Near West Side Partners, the idea of expectation of when we were going to have results was quite varied. And, of the five of us, I actually do government and community affairs. So I was sort of tapped to kind of set some of the stage for that. And I said, oh, well, at Marquette, everything takes 3 years. First year, great idea. Everyone's enthusiastic. Second year, everyone's trying to kill it. So you got to figure out how to work around it. And then the third year, you figure it out and you finally implement. So, and, I had, Harley Davidson and Molson Coors staring at me saying, 3 years, forget it. You have 3 months and we need to have some quick wins. We got to have some and fail fast. If we're going to fail, we fail fast and get right back up. And so, so the discipline that we had to instill for like a commute, poor Keith and I, we were just like, oh my God, what did we sign up for? But we were able to do it, and we had, so I just would say, have very clear metrics. When we came to Penn, I know we give Ira all the props, but Tony really organized our day. So thank you. And I remember when we asked Tony and the team here, what should we do when we start? They said, get a baseline of data, track it, don't try to backfill it. It's really hard. Do something, community meetings. So that's why we did the Harley Davidson meetings. And then the other thing that we learned from some other folks was get some, do something that the residents want that isn't as important to you. Like, so Keith went to every single neighborhood and asked every single group what they wanted, and everyone, even regardless of where they lived, pointed to this tobacco shop that we had. And in the packet that on the little pretty booklet that we have, but you can go on our website, we tried everything to close down this tobacco shop. And I mean, through every resource we had at it, the police, the city attorney, the district attorney, everything, we could not shut it down because of state law. And tobacco shops had a very powerful lobby, the tobacco lobby. And we also had as one of our anchor partners, a brewery. And they are pretty powerful too. The alcohol, I mean, imagine in Wisconsin, the beer lobby is pretty powerful. So they were able to, we used the power of the partnership in the government affairs sense to literally change state law in 6 months to address that tobacco shop. And then that gave the city and the county the opportunity to hold that bad business operator accountable. And it is now a beautiful parking lot. It really is. It's one of the nicest we have. It's got a nice fencing, but it's adjacent next door to Penfield Children's Center that takes children 0 to 3 for special needs. And you had this terrible tobacco shop next door to it that was #1 for bad activity. This was a resident driven initiative, concern, and they couldn't believe that we did it. And that established trust right away. And it also showed us as anchors, we have some clout. We can actually do some things together. So I just share that.
Thank you, Rana. I think one of the other big sort of wins and lessons in terms of building trust is we really concentrate on sort of brick and mortar and physical things that people can see, and as well as the relational. And one of our early wins was getting a choice neighborhood planning grant from HUD, and that allowed us to engage residents for about a 2-year process and then implement a number of projects along our commercial corridors and housing. But people were always sort of saying, oh, is this just a gentrification project? Are you pushing people out? And so I think the fact that our first major housing initiative, we teamed up with the Housing Authority, and then through some funds from Robert Wood Johnson, we were able to attract 150 project-based vouchers, all that went to vacant buildings. So rather than just building on vacant lots, actually rehabbing properties. And so I think, in each domain, it's been important to have very tangible things. But, one of the things that's gone on all along through our history is, in the beginning, a lot of our residents were saying, is this a gentrification project? Are you just going to harm these communities of color? You've been here 100 years and never cared. Why should we trust you? Then later on, our employees were the ones who were saying that. And then along the way, the whole nation started rightfully putting a critical eye to these projects. And I think we're able to stand behind. And one of the things we do is send our students, and they knock on every single door across the 7 neighborhoods. And we ask questions about perceptions of safety, police, assets, our organization. And so we have a lot of data to stand on. But I think when you think of your teams doing the work, and this is really my question for each of you, and I'd invite our friends in Newark to, okay, yeah, we'll cut it up.
Thanks.
Is how do you respond to those sort of critiques? And then how do you sustain this work, especially with the racial equity lens over the long haul?
Maybe should we answer?
Stay on the microphone.
Oh.
So yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you all go ahead and then let's open it up to the audience.
You wanna go first?
I'm gonna be controversial, y'all. I think Nancy heard me. I think a couple of people yesterday heard me. So I would just say this real quick. I know that, yeah, I'm in the academic room here. I know there's academics. I'm not academic. So please forgive me. Okay, yes, yeah, a little bit academic. I just say this, the G word, I don't care about. I don't care about gentrification. I remember I was interviewed by somebody, one of our business owners, African-American owned business owner, opened up in the Near West Side. And the interviewer said, hey, now that you got this business, are you concerned about gentrification? I was like, does gentrification mean we get a grocery store? Does it mean we get a popsicle stand? Does it mean that our residents have amenities? Yes, I'm all for it. Bring me gentrification. If it means that because we're in a fresh food desert, brothers and sisters can't get kale and tomatoes, yes. However, there's a caveat for the academics. It's not about displacement. So if it means removing people from that community so others can live there, increasing taxes, increasing rent, increasing everything else, I'm not for it. So I'm a little confused sometimes with people. We get that question all the time. We are going to protect the brothers and sisters that have spent their life here, their families, they raise their children. They are going to be there. And if we see there's issues with costs going up, that's what we're going to address. We're not going to displace. But if gentrification means getting new businesses, new amenities for our community, I'm all for it. I don't know if that was controversial, Rhonda.
So used to it. He can say that. I would just say we are all about an anti-displacement strategy. And we are, our biggest challenge in the Near West Side, we've done a great job with neighborhood identity and branding. We've done I think we're doing a good job in addressing health equity throughout all of our programming. I think we do a really incredible job, a lot due to Kelsey's work with commercial corridors. We're starting on the housing situation, but we have a long way to go for our neighborhood to tip and for there to be, we don't have a walk to work housing program. We are a neighborhood of last resort for housing or transitional housing. We have students and supportive housing and we have homeless. Yes, we have with largest homeless shelter right down the street from Marquette. So that's our biggest challenge. And so how do we do that with equity, sensitivity, while bringing more workers, people who work in the neighborhood but don't live in the neighborhood? That's our biggest challenge. We want all the people who go to school in the neighborhood, 13 schools. One of our schools has 1,200 Black students from across the city of Milwaukee, and they spend $1 million a year on busing. Like 90% of those kids do not live in the neighborhood. Their families should live in our neighborhood. We should have neighborhood schools, not just destination schools. So we'll stop there, but I'm confident we'll make it, but.
All right. Thank you so much to Near West Side Partners. Wow, that was an incredibly rich panel. So thanks to both Newark Anchor Collaborative and Near West Side Partners. I know we're standing between lunch. So let's see some hands. Okay, we're going to do clusters, right? We're going to do a cluster of 3. And please just take note and remember what these questions are as we go. And then we'll take the 3 hands that are up and then we'll go back to you. So we'll start here, and then there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Youngblood. I'm a senior vice president at Kane University in New Jersey. And let me first say I am a proud alumnus of the University of Pennsylvania. And from the early years, and I'll date myself, Ira, it was CCP when I was running around student as a Penn and as a fellow at the Center for Community Partnerships. But I say that as a framework for the question about aspects of the evolution of how we address, and Nancy, I believe, called metaphorically AITF, the galvanizing tent. how are we continuing to push ourselves, to Linda's point, to make sure that we're addressing some of the inherent power imbalances from the members who are within the group and within the tent, to ensure that issues of equity and racial equity within the galvanizing tent are representative of who we say we are and what that represents for where we're going, let alone what that means for how we engage the communities that we say we anchor. Certainly, Ira can tell you, I was one of the radical students at Penn in the early stages of CCP saying, as long as our partners are overly enamored with the fact that they are at Penn, Penn is facilitating this, and it in some ways encourages them to lose their voice, their passion, and their mission as to why they're at the table. Are we really serving them? Are we really serving ourselves? So this issue of equity, racial equity, and again, addressing the power imbalances, I think is an essential part of that. Our colleague from Tacoma stated quite articulately how important the collective learning is within the group. But in this imbalance of big P's and little P's at the table, there are partners, many of us are the academic institutions who come to the table thinking we have nothing to learn. And so how do we focus more intentionally on collective capacity development of all of the people at the table? And part of what we have to do at our Policy Institute at Kane is continue to retrain ourselves to understand what we often have to give away so that we can bring people to the table and have them understand that there are no little P's and big P's at the table. So how do we continue to think more intentionally about what that represents as we expand the movement to make sure that we're putting our masks on first before we try to go out to external audiences and to community-based groups to say that this is what we represent when we're truly representing something that may be divergent from that.
Got that, folks?
And actually, this is good bundle. Hi, everyone. Anna Thayes, Stanford University. I also had a question on, would love to hear from each of the collaboratives on how to overcome challenges of internal power dynamics and how to learn to call each other in with humility and trust, especially coming from a big P in some ways and the perceived, convening that creates, but then also the, I think, dissonance between that convening and then the actual work that needs to happen.
Yeah, this is the same question about power here, so join the gang here. And this is really looking at the smallest percentage in your demographics, though, especially the Native American population that continues to be erased, especially erased around data. I'm gonna guarantee you more than 0.4% that I see listed in one of the programs here. So how do you account for those that have the smallest voice or no voice in your planning? Because those are the ones that have to have patterns disrupted the most. And they help guide us in understanding how to look through the whole system because they have the least amount of political capital in that sense. So I'd like to hear if you're intentionally designing around those things, or if you're just looking at how do you large scale move people and systems first, just to understand that approach.
Back to all of you.
So I will talk about power dynamics. And I guess a couple of thoughts about that. We're all anchored in Newark, New Jersey, so community voice is very strong. So in order to get work done, we have to do it in an inclusive manner. We can't do it in a siloed manner. I think from the perspective of Prudential, I mean, we are a very large global financial services institution headquartered in Newark, New Jersey. Part of our value proposition of how we think about corporate social responsibility is to be embedded in community. So we always came with a philosophy and ethos that we're one seat, one member of the community. And how do we collectively work together to leverage the different kind of resources and assets we have, because they're different and all equally valuable. I think that philosophy has extended to NAC in that, because we all weren't traditional anchors, we had to come up with our own value proposition of why we would want to lean in and collaborate more intentionally. So we have a very values-based approach to why we want to be a part of NAC. And, you know, the power dynamics actually are cared for by the values that we reinforce as a collaborative.
So just piggyback off what she said. So I always say anchor mission work is anti-racist work, right? We were just not comfortable saying systemic structural racism in closed rooms, you know, before 2020. At least that's how it was for me. It was navigating, right? How do I talk about equity? How do I talk about inclusion? How do I talk about it in a way that doesn't really offend folks or makes them feel uncomfortable? But now we're past that. And if done right, you know, to the point about the tent and how do we make sure that we're representing the right folks and the folks at the bottom and power dynamics, if done correctly by these anchors, as I said, I'm a local hire. So now I get to sit at the table, right? And so I also come from a mixed immigrant status family. And so that voice is also at the table. And so this is what happens when you start hiring locally, you start upskilling folks, and then they're at the table making these decisions and informing the decisions alongside the community and the groups that they know that potentially wouldn't have been acknowledged or overlooked. In terms of the internal challenges, definitely you need to have your CEO buy-in because you need to have that visionary and that stronghold at the top. And then for us, it's been building a lot of accountability infrastructure and teams to build that support and trust and finding a win-win for everyone, right? And so I'm not trying to give someone a different goal, a different task. It's what are your pain points and how does, you know, our racial equity work support you in attaining those goals? And so that's the way I would frame it and work towards that.
Nobody likes this question. I mean, on our side, you guys are great. One thing that we had internally in each of our anchor institutions, of the 5 anchors anyway, was getting our employees to engage. It was one thing for all of us to say we want to engage residents, which in some ways was a lot easier. I mean, not really, but you know, it was something that we didn't have a blueprint for. But internally, it's really hard to get employees to engage in what we're doing in the community, especially for the corporate partners. But I have to say, you know, it's been 8 years. I mean, we have great employee engagement. It could be better. We have a lot of, I think we need to do more to incentivize our employees to engage. And I think because we're all so different and we're in different neighborhoods, there's just different ways for each one to engage, but we are having intentional strategies about that. And by doing that, just to kind of piggyback on what the last speaker just said, I think by doing that engagement, it is helping to address equity issues just by the nature of what we're doing. The other thing I would say is the leadership at the top really matters. And when our university president, who had just started at Marquette, it was the first time we had a lay president, meaning not a priest, a Jesuit. Marquette's a Catholic Jesuit university. So he was great about throwing mission in everybody's face. And I remember a conversation I had with Ira when I was saying, oh my God, our faculty are all over us for blah, blah, blah. And he said, just throw it right back in their face. You know, just use their words and put it right back to them. And that was really effective. So thank you for that. And we have to walk our talk. And so being a mission-driven organization, and then we have a healthcare organization, mission, we put mission of our institutions, including, you know, Harley Davidson, yes, they make motorcycles, but they're all about personal freedom. And Molson Coors, yes, they make beer and other beverages, but they are all about social responsibility. And the tribe, kind of getting to the other question, you know, we have 11 federally recognized tribes in Wisconsin, and we are all on the land that and water that was historically theirs. 3 different tribes had occupied, were original to our community. And we have a terrible history as a state and as a community with the tribes. But that has gotten better. Gaming has helped that a lot. And the Forest County Potawatomi, where their reservation is 3 hours north of the near west side, they have the largest and most successful casino in the Menominee Valley, which is just south of the map that you have on the table. So we abut the valley. 6 million people, more than any other place in the state of Wisconsin, go to the casino. It's the most visited place. The tribe is a huge anchor. They're a huge anchor. And the Potawatomi Business Development Corporation, which has 11 acres of federally recognized land in our neighborhood, they are an incredible asset. They've invested over $100 million in the last 10 years in the neighborhood, stabilized really difficult housing situations. They're an amazing partner. So that has, because of the tribe's investment in the city and in the community that we're in, it's not forced, but encouraged Marquette to do a lot more in recognition of our relationship with tribes. And we have now a Council on Native American Affairs. We have a land and water acknowledgement that we incorporate in everything that we do. And we also recently updated our university seal to be more, pay more respect to the land and the tribes that came before us. And there's lots, we just did another partnership with Lakota Ray College, a tribal college in our state. So we're trying, and they have a voice. So, yeah. Well, yes.
Oh, we do have one of our team members who's just wonderful. She's First Nations, and she has done a lot to help us build relationships in the local community with Native Americans and tribal relations. And so that helped tremendously. I'll say from my Rev Up programs, I went back to, we took a break from that program during COVID and we relaunched it this year. And so I spent some time relooking at everything and spent a lot of time doing power mapping in the spring and re-looking at what we had learned, how things had shaken out. So I think it's a useful tool. We often use it at the very beginning when we're starting something and probably needs to be revisited on a regular basis. And so that was just an exercise I did before we relaunched the program to be intentional about it. And then as far as learnings go, I am in the process, it is taking me a long time, but one of the charges from the Near West Side Partners was that we make some of our materials and our key learnings open source or more easily transferable. And so Rev Up was one of the programs. Harley Davidson said, we will pay you, like carve out some of your time to make sure that everything is documented in a way that other organizations could pick it up so that we are not gatekeepers of the knowledge that we have. And so that is something, not just with that program, but I think other programs we are trying to, once we feel like we have a good formula, it is something that could be transferred and allows other communities to adopt. And so I hope there's more transfer of some of that knowledge to your original question, because I think while each partnership is going to look differently, there's things that will be easily picked up that will make launching or implementing smoother and more effective.
Okay, we should really wrap up and go to lunch. I know you're anxious to talk to each other and talk to panelists. We definitely want to make sure that we're going to end at 3 o'clock. So hopefully you all will get a chance to pose your questions to each other during lunch, engage with each other. As a favor, I'd like you all to also think, as we go to our final segment, which is on next directions, to think about what more you think the Anchor Institutions Task Force can do to strengthen existing anchor partnerships, be a resource to existing anchor partnerships, and also to be a resource toward the creation of new ones. There's so many communities where you don't have a partnership like the ones that have presented to us today throughout our day so far, and could use one in some capacity. One final thing I want to say before we go to lunch is you heard us in the beginning. We talked about the task force's values, and we really are trying to take them to heart. And one of the other things that I want to mention or re-mention that we said early on is that we think this work is about mutually transformative partnerships. So when we talk about the role that anchor institutions play in communities, it is not about a role where the anchor institutions have everything, all the resources, all the knowledge, all the assets, and they just give to communities. That model and that thinking is something that we really wholeheartedly reject in the task force. And institutions have to approach this work with humility in communities and have to realize that they can learn from communities and realize that the lived experience on the ground in communities has tremendous value. So if you approach this work from a totally deficit-based perspective, you're never going to get that, and you're never going to have that willingness to change. So I just want to put that out on the table and want to thank our incredible, rich panel. Just make a slight time adjustment. We want to start our final segment at 1:50. We were originally going to go at 1:45. So you still have a lot of time for lunch, and lunch is outside on the table, I believe. And I believe they're box lunches, so easy to just pick it up and eat wherever you want to eat, I believe, if that's allowed, wherever people want to eat, and have great conversations. And that's one of the things we really wanted to make sure to enable in this meeting. And look forward to reconvening after your lunch. So really enjoy your lunch, folks. Brand new, and another that has been around for a number of decades. And what we want to hear in this panel is, well, what's next for both of these entities, and looking from these really two very different kinds of points of view. Now, we're in Philadelphia, and the first of our partnerships is a group that was once just called Philadelphia.
No name.
And now is officially the Philadelphia Anchor Collaborative, which is really an exciting development. And hopefully we were able to be a resource in some capacity to help you get to this particular point. Yeah, but as I mentioned before the break, let's also think about not only the anchor partnerships that exist, but the anchor partnerships that could exist, right? We're talking about the power and potential of anchor partnerships. So let's now hear from the Philadelphia Anchor Collaborative.
Didn't sound like David was like a warm-up act. They're like the Joey Bishop. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Philadelphia. I hope you're having a great time. It's wonderful convening this morning. A lot of incredible lessons learned. I thought we were going to go second because in baseball, home field advantage means you pitch first, bat second, but okay. We'll just have to let the Phillies do that later tonight. But no, this is great. We do have some exciting news. Several months ago, when this concept of the Anchor Collaborative kind of first emerged, I was contacted and asked if I would help kind of think it through and see if we could get something off the ground. And, you know, I've heard from some of the folks in the room about how their mayors got things going, or CEOs and institutions got things going. And I actually answer to a higher calling, Ira Harkavy. And so when the higher calling comes in, you answer the call. And so Ira asked if I would take a look at something like this. And you know, I'm an associate vice president at Penn. I've been at Penn for 22 years as of yesterday. It was my 22nd anniversary. And that's a lot of years, right? And I was talking to Nancy about it, and Judith Roden was part of the hiring team when I got hired those years ago. And she said, you know, Penn has been in West Philadelphia since 1872, and that history has not always been great. But we're under a new leadership. We're under a new direction. We've got all things going on. Will you help us? And I'd come from a public affairs and an urban planning background. And I was talking with Nancy earlier that looking in this room today, this is the representation of an anchor profession. This is different. This just convening here, David, Ira, feels different because there's a kind of professionalization that is being spoken about today that I haven't heard in the 20 years around this space. And that's extremely exciting. So anyway, I'm with Peter Grolman from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Joanne Ferroni from Drexel University, Claire from Temple is around here somewhere, say hi. Deborah Diamond from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank is here. They're helping to make up our collaborative. The other members of the founding group will be Matthew Berkheiser, who runs the University City District. And the two people that I started with in building this collaborative from the ground up, and the name, the collaborative, is about 24 hours old. The actual convening is about 6 months old of the work that we've been doing. But I started with that old line where you follow the money. And I called the Pew Charitable Trusts, and then I called the William Penn Foundation. And I said, we have this idea, would you join? And we're not asking you to join because you come with the resources and the money. You have the wide angle lens on everything that's happening in the city. The foundations know something that the rest of us kind of don't know because everyone's coming to them. And so the conversation we had was Philly is anchor rich, but collaborative poor. And that is a quality. We are not, as Peter and I have known each other for years, and Deborah and I, we don't always play well together in this city. It is sharp elbowed. It is competitive. You're so surprised Philly's competitive. We're a sharp elbowed city. And I think part of the reason why it's gotten competitive is the pie hasn't grown. And so we're all fighting over the same slices. But I do believe that the pie can grow, and it is growing. And I think the anchor institutions are going to play a big role in that. Now, we are a complex city. Just a couple of statistics. No, Philadelphia is second, unfortunately, in opioid deaths in the United States. And we are second in murders from handguns or guns. These are horrible, horrible statistics. We're the most impoverished big city of the top 10 big cities in America, with about 30% poverty, 28% poverty. These are chilling statistics. At the same time, we are number one in cell and gene therapy research. We are top 5 in bringing in funds from the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation between institutions like ours, $2 billion a year. So the dichotomy that exists in this city is so odd. We don't have a lot of Fortune 100 companies. We have 1 or 2. We are anchor rich. And so how does the richness of the anchors, how do we collaborate? And so we've been at this for a long time as anchors, but it's embryonic when it comes to collaboration. And so that's what our group is going to start to do with some of these founding kind of members. So I wanted to kind of start things off on that. I have been calling many of you around this room on the phone and on Zoom for the last couple of months, asking you how you formed your collaborations and what we ought to know in Philadelphia. And it's been so incredibly valuable. And we come at this from a place of real humility, a word that's been said more than once here today. One of the things that Nancy and Peter were telling me out of Newark was, when Penn enters the room, it's big. And you can't enter as Penn. You have to enter as an institution among institutions. And that's why, as I've talked with my colleagues, Penn won't lead this. At most, it will co-lead this temporarily. But we will have a handoff situation so that it's sustainable over time. It will be broad-based, eds and meds, but also like Deborah's here from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. I'm going to embarrass Deborah for a moment. Deborah has just authored, I think, one of the most important papers in the country right now and projects. She has created a dashboard illustrative of which cities are anchor dependent. Philadelphia Federal Reserve working with all of the others. So we have the emails from folks here. I think we could email it out or whatnot. David, we could put it in with I think it was on maybe the Marga last newsletter. So look at it. Really an incredible tool, an incredible method. So there's an example of richness in the way we think about this kind of work. And so I've been talking with our colleagues in Milwaukee and whatnot around the country. You can't do it alone. It has to be collaborative. There can't be one leader, but multiple leaders in terms of creating something of sustenance and stability. The other thing is, and as was said earlier, is that it can't be solved by one institution because one institution didn't create the problem. And so there's got to be a multitude of responses. So as we start off forming the collaborative, and we've had some conversations, the question I'm asking, and we're all asking and trying to answer is, based on some of the data I threw out, where Philly is, strengths and weaknesses, in the present situation of the city of Philadelphia, what is it that the Anchor Collaborative can uniquely do to help address some of the serious problems facing the city? Because if they were addressable and easily solved, they would have been already. And yet here we are with persistent violence, with persistent drug addiction, with persistent low educational attainment. Yet we're anchor rich. Another dichotomy. How do we as a profession start to figure this out? So I'm incredibly inspired by all the collaborative stories that I'm hearing today. I texted Corey Bowman in the middle of this and said, I'm blown away by the professionalization from the first time we met as an AITF 10 years ago. David, it might've been in Baltimore before New York or early in New York. It's not that old, right? It's only a decade, but the professionalization of it has been just kind of incredible. We have so much to learn in Philadelphia about how to collaborate across sectors to address these kind of situations. So I want to turn it over to Peter and Joanna to talk a little bit about Children's Hospital and Drexel and the work that they're doing individually, and maybe an example or two of what you're learning, and maybe some collaborations that you have underway that are addressing. So Peter.
Sure. Well, welcome to Philadelphia. It's great to see everyone. And Tony, thank you for including me in the discussion today. As Tony's talking, I'm getting more educated on what it was that we've created here. And I had no idea. It sounds terrific.
So glad you showed up.
My colleague Alonzo South is here. He's our Assistant Vice President for Community Impact. And so Alonzo and I meet regularly. We meet once a week and we talk about all of this work that we're doing. And we were talking about the Anchor mission work. And so I guess our next meeting, Alonzo, we're going to have a whole lot to catch up on to figure all this out. It's a journey. And I think I've been at CHOP for 15 years. So a little less years than Tony has been at Penn. And when I came to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, we had about 6,000 employees. We had one hospital and a smattering of outpatient care facilities. Today, we have 26,000 employees, 2 hospitals, and over 60 locations throughout South Jersey and Pennsylvania, including two locations outside of country, one in Botswana and one in the Dominican Republic. So I point all that out because as I have been working over the years with our president and CEO, Madeline Bell, and thinking about our role in what it is that we can do to better support our community, the underpinning issue here is that as we have grown, the community around us has not. And there are such wonderful things happening in these communities. We have incredible small nonprofits. There's incredible pride in the community. You see families coming together and doing incredibly remarkable things. And I think the challenge for us is how do you help them build off that based on the needs that they identify and the ways that they can partner with you to accomplish goals. And I really credit Alonzo and his team for taking an approach that frankly we didn't take years ago, and that is community-led, community-informed. And that's been a real shift in terms of how we've been approaching our work. I think we have a ways to go, but the change has been, one of, we're an academic medical center and we know what's right for you because the research tells us so, it's evidence-based, to more of, let's listen to you. And if we know that something works, we're going to share this with you and we're going to get your feedback from you. And so I'm really excited about the potential of what it is that we will offer even beyond what it is that we're doing today. The second thing I'll say is that when I started in my role, the idea that a hospital would get involved in housing The idea that a hospital would get involved in farming is foreign to me. You wouldn't touch it, you wouldn't do it. But over the years, you all know people have been talking about this and saying, no, in fact, there is a role for you to do these things because one, you're going to support your community, you're going to create jobs, you're going to create housing, but you're also going to improve health in doing it. And so that has been an opportunity for us in terms of how we've created a strategy in the community to address the social determinants of health. And again, not a lot of this is new to many of you, but I think it's important to call out the fact that you have to build culture around this. You have to build support, not only within your organization, outside your organization, and with your donor community as well. People who will help make sure that this work is sustainable. And the last thing that I'll say before I turn it over to Joanne is that, you know, as we look at the work that we do, the area that I think we've missed here in Philadelphia is we haven't put our strategies on the table for everyone to see. That's a missed opportunity. Why should you be doing the same thing I'm doing, the same thing you're doing, and we're not working together? In fact, you may even see that each of us has our own infrastructure that's essentially doing the same things. Well, that's incredibly inefficient. It's wasteful. And to your part about competing for the pie, doesn't send a great message. So this is an area where I think we do have a lot of opportunity ahead of us. And that's why I'm excited by whatever, Tony, you've just created within the last 30 minutes.
I know, I didn't know we were official till I saw it on the name tag. So I'm Joanne Ferroni. I'm the Director of University and Community Partnerships at Drexel, which is an established anchor. I am also partially on loan to St. Christopher's Hospital for Children in North Philadelphia, which is an emerging anchor that has had transitioning leadership coming out of bankruptcy, newly in nonprofit status with zero infrastructure in Eastern North Philadelphia. So for anyone who doesn't know, right west, we're going Eastern North, right next to the center of the opioid epidemic, some of the highest poverty in our city. And they've just done their first community health needs assessment. So we are in two very different places thinking about how we can take what's working at Drexel. And part of my role as an anchor fellow for AITF is to learn from all of you. What is that special sauce, both within the way that individual organizations are organized and how they situate this work, where it's situated and how it's funded, as well as the power of collaboration. In one of my first conversations with David around the fellowship, I was like, why doesn't Philadelphia have this? Right? Like, it's mind blowing. There's so much good work happening in silos. And it's not that people don't collaborate. We've got collective impact. I know it was talked about earlier, coming out our ears, right? Like, we've got collective impact on top of collective impact even. But it's all about money, or it's all about this. And so some of the things as I've been listening are those definitions of place. And does the size of the place make a difference, right? Thinking about Newark, you have taken on a city. We've all taken on sections of a city. We've all taken on separate neighborhoods. How does that align as we think about who are the right partners to have at the table? Does there need to be a perfect moment that's around, you know, in Tacoma, your index, right? Or, you know, a level of readiness. Do we have that? Do we need it, or do we need to create it? Do you need a mayor who believes in this? Maybe our next mayor is the one who can help convene us. Right now, we're not there, right? Our school district isn't convening us. And so how do we create that right moment today for all of us across anchors that are thinking about from emerging to established, from health systems that are thinking about neighborhoods all the way to cities and regions, and how we take some really good infrastructure that exists in our city, right? Not only are we all doing local procurement, we're all paying into at the Economy League, which has Philadelphia Anchors for Growth. We're all thinking about talent strategies and working with Josh
at West Philly Skills Initiative, which really is now just like all of Philadelphia Skills Initiative. You know, there's a lot of how. We just haven't figured out how to bring it together yet. And that really is the opportunity that I think we all see before us. And what Peter didn't say is that he challenged all of us to put our plans on the table, right? How do we put them on the table and say, here's what we're all committed to? You know what? It's probably not all that different. And how do we do it together?
That's step one for our convening. Building the collaboration is we're going to share our plans and we're going to evaluate them. We're probably going to find someone third-party neutral to help evaluate them, to tell us where the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats may lie. But so we're building, you know, in the future, we hope to come back and be able to give you updated information on how we're doing. It's going to be a fun journey to figure this out in a anchor-rich city like Philadelphia with incredible partners like this and with Deborah and with Claire and others. So why don't we stop there and turn it to our colleagues at Hartford?
Thanks so much to the Philadelphia Anchor Collaborative. And congratulations on, you know, this embryonic stage, as you mentioned, and best of luck to you as you move forward. And now, you know, really an incredible veteran anchor part. I don't know of an anchor partnership that is quite as veteran as SINA, that's been around for 45 years. And you know, has a long track record. But of course, all of this work requires renewal, reinvention, reimagination as time progresses, as neighborhoods change, as priorities change. So would love to hear from you all in terms of where you are in your work after all these years, and what is your vision in terms of next directions for the future?
Well, thank you. And good afternoon. My name is Logan Singerman and I'm with SINA. And yes, we've had our name for 45 years. And we're a little more than embryo, we're more like a middle-aged adult, I guess, now. This is Melvin Colon, our fearless executive director. And so, yeah, we're here today to talk to you about our future plans. And so this is a really great conversation because we're in the middle of our strategic planning process. So we're really thinking about that. And also, we've been at this for 45 years. So we've done this before, you know, kind of, as it's been mentioned, the community is always changing. The anchors are always changing. So what has worked then isn't always going to work now. And so you always have to have your ear to the ground. And so we're going to be talking about what's worked in the past and what we're thinking in the future. But since SINA has a unique structure, we thought it would be useful to start just by level setting and just letting you know kind of some of the pros and cons of our structures and how that impacts everything as we're making decisions within our context. So I will hand it off to Melvin.
Hi, I've been in Massachusetts and Connecticut for 49 years, but I had my appendix removed at St. Christopher Hospital. I went to Stetson Junior High School and Central High School. So when I come to Philadelphia, I feel like I'm coming home, the same as when I go to Puerto Rico. I only lived there for 2 years. I feel like I'm going home also. I wanted to call my presentation Structure Matters. And then I thought about it and said, does structure matter? Why? And then I said, why structure matters? So maybe I'll work through this confusion as I'm talking. In terms of governance, the board of SINA so SINA has 3 partners: Hartford Hospital, the Connecticut Children's Medical Center, and Trinity College. And the board, however, is composed of 3 high-level executives to mid-level executives from each of the institutions, so 9 board members in total. So this could be one factor in the endurance of SINA. The buy-in from the board has weathered 17 changes in chief executives, in presidents and CEOs. So over the 45 years that we've been in existence, there have been 17 different chief executives, yet the organization endures, the organization goes on. And I think a lot of that has to do because the board has a lot of buy-in from these high to mid-level managers who talk to the chief executives on a regular basis. In fact, one of our board members about 10 years ago is now the president of Hartford Hospital. So that buys us even a little more buy-in, a little more leverage. However, the trade-off in that is reduced access to the power of the C-suite and to money. So that a lot of except for isolated instances, the institutions that make up SINA have not made direct investments. And Logan is going to talk about an exception to this when he talks about the learning quarter. But by and large, the SINA model is a leverage model rather than a direct investment model. The institutions invest in the core funding and the operating expenses of SINA, but they don't really, with the one exception, or maybe a couple of exceptions, they invest in the core funding of SINA and in a small amount in a home ownership program for their employees. But by and large, they don't invest in projects. SINA leverages money rather and for the projects that it does in home ownership, in hiring, and hopefully in the future in purchasing. We leverage the money and, for example, for about the last 25 years, SINA has, the institutions have invested about $30 million of their own resources into SINA. SINA has leveraged about $140 million from this federal government, from the state, and from philanthropic sources. We're talking about small geography here, so we're not talking about the billions of dollars in a city in Johns Hopkins or Chicago or Philadelphia or Cleveland. We're talking about a neighborhood, so that the $140 million investment is actually quite significant. The lesson here is that big investments, if you want really big investments, you really require the leadership of Nancy Cantor, Paul Pribenow, and some of the other presidents that are here in the room. But in many cases, the leadership changes over, and that could be the end of that involvement, that investment in the community. To survive the long term, I think that anchor institutions are going to need to leverage investment. It must create a structure that will withstand the change in leadership. And for us, that structure has been that board of directors that has bought into the organization. Now, SINA, in terms of how many partners we can bring together, SINA has never had more than 4 partners. And really, for most of the existence of SINA, we've only had 3 partners. In order to grow the partnership, from what I've heard here, from what I've learned from you, the partnership must have the presence of a catalytic convener, someone when the companies got together in Hartford to do something, that was way back in 1980, they called it the Hartford process. And their idea when they got together was to figure out a way to move the Puerto Ricans out of the city of Hartford. So that was not a good experience. They reconsidered, but they never put in place anything positive as a way of benefiting the community. That was it. We didn't do it, so, pat us on the back. Those were the insurance companies and some of the other private investors in Hartford. Typically, the catalyst convener role is a community foundation, and this I've learned here. It's a community foundation or the mayor's office or some similar organization. The Pew Foundation I just heard right now is an important catalytic converter. When I first came to SINA, I made an effort to move the local community foundation and the mayor's office to become those catalytic conveners of the numerous anchor institutions in Hartford. I brought Ira Harkavy to talk to the chief executives. I brought Ted Howard from the Democracy Collaborative, and he spoke to a lot of people in the city of Hartford. And the mayor was present, the community foundation was present, but I was never able to move the needle. I was never able to get the city or the foundation to buy in. Now, our current mayor probably, if he had been around, he probably would have bought in. He is a pretty progressive presence, but I gave up at that point in trying to convene. I thought that was too hard a climb for me, and so I moved on to developing a hiring program. But perhaps I shouldn't have given up. Perhaps I shouldn't have given up, and perhaps I should go back, because we do have a lot of anchor institutions. We do have quite a few corporations as well. I'll hand it over to Logan.
So what has SINA done over the last 45 years as we found ourselves in changing times and trying to be responsive to what's going on the ground? So Melvin mentioned the one exception. So in the mid-90s, the executives of the organization themselves were feeling an increased passion and need to be personally involved in the well-being of the neighborhood beyond the status quo. Because in the mid-90s, there was increased gang violence, issues of public safety, and there was increased blight and just feelings like the gains that were being made were being lost. So Evan DeBell enters the scene, the new president of Trinity College. I think he was the mayor somewhere on the West Coast, probably where they don't have income tax. And he came in and he threw some money from Trinity's endowment on the table. And then the other anchors matched him and they leveraged funds. And their focus was, there was this, so Connecticut Transit, they had their bus garage where they parked their buses, they fixed them. The neighborhood hated it. I mean, imagine all like CT Transit buses just going through all the time, pollution, noise, bunch of issues. So this large block right in between the anchors, they were able to create schools, on-site state-of-the-art schools that then, neighborhood kids as well as children from the region are able to access. So that was the learning corridor. And during that time, in order to facilitate that, SINA had to sort of increase its structure to be able to help with the management of that process. One of our partners historically that we used to work with a lot was called Broad Park Development. SINA actually helped to found that CDC to help build affordable housing in the neighborhood, partnered with them a lot. There's another organization called HEART, which was really big into community organizing in the 70s. Hartford areas rallied together. They were also a large partner. Both of them are no more. Like both of them early 2000s ended. And so SINA has sort of seen that in the landscape and seen that need and stepped into that role. So that's why SINA has built about 90 houses on formerly vacant lots or blighted properties that no one was going to touch, and making mostly, multifamily homes for low and moderate income home buyers, which the vast majority are people of color. And just, it really has made a big difference in the neighborhood over time. But we're doing that knowing that it's not clear who else would do that work if we weren't doing that work. And then also with HEART meeting its demise, and even years before, you could tell they were limping and not having the same presence that they used to. SINA wanted to have a stronger community and engagement presence. And so they actually built a staffing position that focused on that. And what that has led to has been knocking on doors, having conversations, finding where you can find mutual passions, linking that to resources, and seeing what beautiful stuff happens that you couldn't have imagined before you started talking. And so what that's looked like has been things like vacant lots becoming playgrounds made out of tires and wood, murals, vacant lots becoming art gardens, neighborhood hero murals, bilingual history tours of the people's history of the neighborhood, and so on and so forth. But all of that came out of SINA asking that question of what can we do now in our context, what is missing, filling that void, not knowing what was going to happen, but 5 years down the road, seeing the fruit of that labor. So those are some of the things we've done in our 45 years. And I will hand it back to Melvin as we start talking about what next.
So what's next for us? We're in a strategic planning process, which happens for most organizations every 3 to 5 years. So this creates an opening to think about what could we keep doing? What can we stop doing? Do we need to do everything that we're doing? And so it's an opportunity. And one of the things that we've been looking at for the last few years is trying to develop a vision for development, because without a vision, it's difficult to, well, I'm saying the obvious, right? Without a vision, it's difficult to inspire, to motivate, to raise money. And so we're trying to use the strategic planning process to move our institutions to develop a vision for the 3 major corridors so that we can take some of the vacant land, some of the blighted land in those 3 major corridors and begin to develop them for the community. Again, Hartford is not, gentrification is it's a fairly localized phenomenon, so that if it exists in places like Denver, it exists in a lot of the places around the country. It's not a real dynamic yet. It's still a few years away, maybe many years away in Hartford. So if we invest in the major corridors, we're not concerned because we know that we're trying to develop the neighborhood, not by subtracting the people who are low income, but by adding folks that are working families. And that's what we're trying to do with the investment in our corridors. The strategic planning process identifies that the time is right for major investment in developing the major corridors and neighborhoods. And it's also right to get a purchasing program. Because of the nature of the decentralization of purchasing, because anchor institutions now are no longer as local as they used to be, because anchor institutions now are part of major systems. And this is one of the ideas that I ran by to David to talk about in a future meeting, because anchor institutions are less hyper local than they used to be. Getting momentum on a purchasing program has been difficult. So this is an opportunity the strategic planning process will hopefully open for us. And we're learning lessons from you on how to implement that, because I know that it's really, really hard. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is another opportunity. I listened with some envy last time because we talked about the internal changes that anchor work should be doing in the institutions, in the anchor institutions themselves. And we finally, and for us, we had a hiring program and we weren't able to create any institutional changes. So we did our hiring program relationship with a hiring manager by relationship with another hiring manager with another hiring manager. And so that was very difficult. The people who applied for jobs still have to go through a very complicated computer system. And one of the things that they had to do was provide 5 references. Why would you need 5 references? I'm not really sure. So the one thing that I can say that we've actually made an institutional change is that there was one woman who complained, 5 references. I don't know, 5 people who can you please help me, to our career navigator. And she went to Hartford Hospital and she said, why are you requiring this? And they said, you're right. We don't need these 5 references. So let's who knows if they even read those 5 or talk to those people. But let's actually change this. And that person was hired. So it's a very modest change, but it's the first change. And maybe we can keep working on this hiring system so that it isn't so cumbersome and burdensome, where we can get more traction going on it. And Logan has one final, what's next for us?
So I would hope that everyone who is new here would be encouraged, because as I was talking with Rita yesterday, yeah, we're old, which is great. On the other thing, we're old. So having a blank canvas is not a bad thing necessarily, we do a lot of housing work, and we know that sometimes a new build is less complicated than rehab. And to have a blank slate and to build it intentionally on purpose now, knowing what you know, learning from people like us, that's an opportunity. So I hope you are encouraged by that. And as Melvin said, we are certainly learning a lot from a lot of you. And the last thing, which actually, once again, learning from people that are here, measurement really matters. And so I've heard that from a number of partners here. So we're currently, through our planning process, we're trying to link explicitly with measurement of how SINA's work impacts the social determinants of health. I mean, everyone knows that conceptually, but there's this weird cognitive dissonance because, we're not really measuring it. Obviously we're building houses and that's impacts health, but so we're working on that measurement, but we also ideally, what would be transformative for impact in the future is if we could get those dashboards similar to what's been mentioned in Newark, with the anchors themselves, to be able to submit to a mutually accountable system where we're knowing how many people they're hiring, what they're buying, where they're buying it, how many people are living in the neighborhood, and to actually, to agree to that and to buy into that. And that would be transformative. Because whereas, the good news is with everything that we've been building in our hyper local area, we are kind of running out of land to build on, which is good. That's really great. That's a lot of properties that have been brought on. So it's kind of hard to see where, there's not another learning corridor in our neighborhood that we could build. But imagine the transformation of the institutions actually hiring a bunch of local residents from our neighborhood. While you can't see that just driving in a car by a large school, that impact is just as great, if not arguably greater. So we definitely have a lot on our frontier, a lot of impact that we can make, and hopefully, we can tell some of your stories, and using the power of positive peer pressure, and just kind of like, sort of outsiders and your expertise maybe being given some higher priority, maybe we can make some inroads. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Sina. And Logan, yes, absolutely. That's what we intend to do in our action-oriented learning community, is to provide you with those examples from peers that can be influential back in your home communities. So hopefully that's something everybody is taking to heart. So now we're going to open up the floor again. I know our discussion got cut off before as we were going to lunch. So any questions, comments for the panel? Any thoughts you want to put on the table for the Anchor Institutions Task Force in terms of what more we can do to help maximize the power and potential of anchor partnerships?
Thank you. My name is Joshua Park. I'm with the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative, or the Philadelphia Skills Initiative, or whatever we're gonna be called. I think a renaming is already on the way. We're always ahead of the curve. So somebody somewhere knows what our real name is going to be soon. A lot of conversation. Nice today to get to know Hakeem over here and talk about the work that he's doing at the Netter Center, having just started there. Been really great to chat with him, by the way. And I've spent a lot of time working with Claire over the last year and a half. A lot of the conversation that we have, particularly, and I'll focus on workforce because that's what I do, is about how there's all these organizations. There's like 400 nonprofits in Philadelphia that are working on workforce, like whether it's education or jobs or whatever it is, right? Training, technical training, professional training, whatever that is. And this same thing that you're talking about, the anchors have trouble with, is like sharing their actual plans, right? Who's going to get the piece of the pie? And I've consistently for the last 7 years at the Skills Initiative been like, aren't we all eating pie? Like if somebody gets hired and I claim it and you claim it, that's great. We all have the pie. But still, that thing about being duplicative is the thing that really like shakes me up. I can't figure it out, right? Is how do we really, how do we go from idea to implementation? How do we actually map out the work that people are doing, right? I think it's in data. I think that measurement is super important. And I think that to what you were saying, Logan, like you have to figure out what you're measuring and why. Claire's doing great work with that in North Philly. But then you have to get agreement amongst everybody that we're all going to measure in the same way so that we know who could be impacted by this, who's getting through it, what the actual outcome is that comes out of the back end, and then where do we want to put more into. And some of the organizations here today talked about how they're like just kind of measuring where we're at now so we can see where the gaps are. In 45 years, how have you all done that work? How have you done the work to make sure that you're not being duplicative, but you are uplifting good work that you do see, filling in the gaps? How have you been measuring up till now to make sure that you can see what's happening and know where you should hit, Sorry for the long,
Thank you. Actually, we're going to get another question in because we want to maximize our time here.
This is going to be interesting to pair with that last one, because I was going to just say, my degrees are in linguistics, and I think that measurement is rhetoric. And so I think that, and having been doing this work now with Nancy for 16 years or something like that, I feel like we often feel ourselves forced to come up with numbers to please, to try to demonstrate to people in some objective sense what the impact of our work is. And I think that's sometimes a trap. And I think that's especially difficult with collaboration, because a lot of the impact is not in numbers that we have yet figured out how to calculate. And so my question is, and I started this conversation with our CFO a little earlier, and And I'm reflecting back here on Keith earlier, being the rabble rouser. Right with you. Are there, as you think about starting anew here in a very ambitious way, can you envision ways of doing things, if you're forced to do it, of tracing a dollar in a different way? Because right now we think of dollar as a so-called bottom line. How much money are you spending on something? And so, you know, what are the ways that you can think of to better evaluate impact if you had to with a dollar?
Okay, so we're going to take those two and then we're going to do another cluster. So responses to those two.
Yeah, sure. I wish that we could get our board to think that a measurement was rhetoric. I think that that would be a really big step forward for them. In terms of the workforce, I experience a lot of the same frustrations that that you do. I know that the people in Hartford experience that. SINA doesn't actually do training. We have agreements with training programs, and then we take theirs and we navigate those graduates into jobs at the institution. So we don't actually do that, but because we're working with our training partners, we get to go to meetings. And in Hartford, there are endless meetings of these training partners. And I was in working cities and I got a taste of this, and I just had to get out of it because I just didn't have enough time in my day to go to all the meetings that the partners had. And absolutely, it is a problem that this discussed constantly. Every training partner keeps their data in a different way, and they're not compatible. That's not portable. It's very difficult. So that they just hired somebody to map the system, but there was a data haven, a collaborative, actually trying to get everybody to use the same measures. And in a small city like Hartford, which would be a neighborhood in Philadelphia, wouldn't even be West Philadelphia, we can't get people to agree on data.
Okay, any others? All right.
So I have battle scars from spending 2+ years trying to get a data sharing MOU together between our university, the district, and the city. Sharing data is not easy. Everyone feels like their data is special and different. But I keep thinking about something that I heard recently in a panel in Detroit. And it's really thinking about what are the metrics that we're tracking and where do they fall within the difference between the sphere of influence and the sphere of control. So a lot of time as collaboratives, we pull together and say, we're going to have this many more kids graduate. A lot of my work's in education, or we're going to have higher test scores. But we don't control that, right? We fund pieces of it. We fund partnerships. We don't control that data. And so being very clear as we start to think about our metrics, what is actually in our individual spheres of control and our collective spheres of control, and then what do we want to work towards collaboratively through that sphere of influence? But that we're not going to be able to do alone because we don't control all of those outcomes.
You're going to keep me honest. I'm sure we're going to have a conversation about what I'm going to say afterwards. When I think of data and I think about our journey as a children's hospital, as an academic medical center, we're evolving. So in other words, you know, some of our programs have a high degree of maturity. So our housing renovation program is backstopped by way of the data through the work of our research institute. So we have people who've been looking at this over the years and saying, if you remove the triggers of asthma, you improve the air quality of the home, there are things that they're going to be able to measure, whether it's reduced days, admissions in the hospital, reduced visits to the emergency department, so on and so forth. Peer-reviewed, put in journals. That's the easy stuff. And you have an audience for that. Then I also think there's some of these things that, you know, frankly, just put a smile on the face. And I would argue that's okay too. Not highly scientific, but it does show that you're moving the dial. Part of that being the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative. So I'm going to call it WIPSI, as we know. But that's a relationship that is a hospital in crisis today. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard about what's going on with RSV. Our hospital's full. We need people. We need WIPSI to train people quickly to help work in our hospitals and to help us manage this. And so that's a relationship where you look and you say, I'm a general contractor. I go out and I find different companies to help us do the things we can't do ourselves, WIPSI being one of them, to get workers from our community trained, ready to go, working in our hospital. The bonus is they start in one job this year, and maybe 3 years from now, they move on to a better job, to a better job, to a better job. Those are some things that I think at the end of the day, maybe not scientific by the way we're measuring them, but certainly if we look at the numbers we have in front of us, very much moving the dial.
We're data rich. We measure everything. Not going to talk about that, but something Ira taught me a long time ago was that sometimes the process is the product. It's hard to measure process, but it's impactful. And so I think that we have to think, to Peter's point, we can't get caught up in all of the numbers. And just lastly, and David will go on. Josh, did you say that there were 400 some organizations doing workforce in Philadelphia? Don't you think that at some point someone should have stopped creating workforce organizations? I mean, honest to God, is that a failure of government? What is the role of the government in creating jobs? What is the role of the non-government organization? What's the role of the anchor institution? God forbid, 400 is an embarrassment. In a city like Philadelphia, where you have 25% people living below poverty, half of them children, and backbreaking generational poverty. And we're going to quibble over who gets to create what job? It's an embarrassment. So I think one of the things we ought to look at is that. And I'm going to call you on this later because that's fascinating to me.
We have a long line developing, and now 4 in the queue, 4 in the queue. So I'm going to take all 4 as a bundle. So please do take notes, folks on the panel.
So Nate Laver with the Pierce County Building and Construction Trades Council. I've been part of this conversation now for 5 hours, really. So as anchor institutions, if you're doing capital projects, you have tremendous tools to be able to tackle some of these workforce development and generational poverty, as well as educational issues. How do you as collectively be able to do that and go to the accounting office, seeing as we're talking about numbers, and say, hey, if we put $1 into this and make sure that we're hiring out of these historically disenfranchised neighborhoods that's been done systemically, we can actually invest in breaking that generational poverty. And because we're all working together as a university or as a medical institution, we can create a pathway out and make the next generation even better.
I think I've got something on that one. I'm going to listen, but.
George Zeno, Pacific Lutheran University. Just goes back to the data question. Sorry. And that is the, especially since you're saying you're challenging about sharing data, that is about reporting. You can collect all the data you want to, but if you're into movement building, my question to you then is, how are you reporting back to the movements in your community? Because if you're going to be anti-racist, then you need to be accountable to the movements that are on the ground doing the work with those communities at the smallest percentage in our population bases that need that support. Second question that ties to what Nathan was just saying is, and maybe I'm putting Penn on the spot here for this question. How can we better leverage assets, including our endowments, to do this work? How do we look at our balance sheets to leverage the margins that we know that could be utilized by corporations that are playing all kinds of tricks and games with the market to help us do this work?
I was gonna, of course, layer on my buddies comment and say, ask you how much attention, if you're going to do metrics, how much attention are you going to pay to sustainability of the anchor partnership? Because we all know this work is 1 step forward and 20 steps back, always. And there's been way too much attention on, in my view, on short-term outcomes and not on building the kinds of sustainable structures of partnerships that would really have a long-term lifespan, like Sina has had. I mean, so I'm just questioning, and Tony and I talked about this a little bit. I mean, how do you build in to our partnerships some reverence for sustainability?
I was going to say, we're going to run out of time for the endowment answer.
Yeah, 16 minutes left.
I can drag the pump.
Alonzo South Children's Hospital, Philadelphia. So I always like listening to people with contrary views to my own, or just in general, it always helps. So there's a professor in Trinity College, Dr. Devarian Baldwin. He wrote a book. You're nodding your head, so I'm sure you read it. In the Shadow of Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities. So I read the book. I thought it was really interesting. This is when I first heard about Hartford. And so it's interesting to have both of you represented. And so he's extremely critical, not extremely, that's too harsh. He's very critical of, he mentioned Sina, he mentioned Penn, and just some challenges that universities have had with residents. I say all that to say, there's this undercurrent of skepticism from some members in the community when they hear about anchor institutions wanting to do more in the community and questioning their motives, questioning, well, why are you doing this, given some of not just the history, but some of the contemporary challenges that community members and residents have with universities. So just, if you could just speak to repairing trust, building trust, because I really do think that continues to be an issue in a lot of cities.
Okay, back to all of you. My mic's not working. What happened? No, this is awesome. And I agree with you. I like these kinds of discussions. I think we're all going to try to kind of get in on this a little bit. Nancy, I want to speak to one thing, and I don't want this to sound kind of promotional when I say this, but on the longitudinal part of it that you were talking about, in 1986, Penn President Sheldon Hackney created a kind of a buy West Philadelphia, a local West Philadelphia program, which was how do you spend money in West Philadelphia? How do you stimulate that local economy? And it still exists in 2022. And in year one, we spent $22,000. And last year we spent $38 million. And there's this really interesting chart to look at it, but it's stalled over the years. When you look at the chart, it's weird. It kind of goes up, it goes like this, it goes up, it goes like this. And it stalled recently. And what we did was we created a program where we realized it was not the suppliers. There was plenty of suppliers. It was the buyers. The buyers had their favorites, and the buyers were buying who they liked. Oh, Joe has always sold me flowers. I like Joe. He's reliable. It's a good price. So we created a whole system in which the buyers, of which there are 1,000 at Penn with purchasing powers, where we educate them on the local and diverse suppliers, all kinds of programs. It's called Fueling Business Growth. You can look it up and find it. It's interesting, but that just gets to the longevity. And it lasted Sheldon Hackney, Claire Fagan, Judy Roden, Amy Gutman, and now Liz McGill, and not to mention how many executive vice presidents who are in charge of procurement. So there are those kinds of moments. On the endowment part, I think it's a really great issue. Some of it's restricted, that can't be spent. Some of it is unrestricted, that can be spent. And we're taking a good, long, deep look at what can be spent, what's addressable with what can be spent versus not. It is the issue of higher education, kind of more than anything else right now. We have 3,000 individual funds that are restricted, that we can't touch, which make up about 90%. 10% goes to the operating. Of that 10%, what's fungible? What can we play with? So that's a good question. I can't give you an answer now, but we're looking at it for sure. Yeah.
I'll just quickly build off the question about balance sheet. You know, one of the things that when our CEO took over the hospital is she said, I'm going to change my leadership team in terms of representation, people of color on this team. And over time, there are more people of color around this table. Where it comes down to the balance sheet is that as the CEO, certainly she's in a position to make decisions about our spending. What she's done is she's created a team that now is making decisions around this spending. They own the spending when it comes to our construction. We have $5 billion worth of construction underway right now, $800 million in supply chain contracts. All of this is led by people of color. They are positioned to develop relationships with businesses and others and to work with their teams to really build culture around this work. And so it has taken probably about 5 or 6 years to build us up to this point. But we're finally at a point, you know, as Tony said, you go from these are the people we always worked with to, hey, look, we're going to bring new people into the team, right? We're going to go and we're going to look and we're going to look and we're going to look. And by the way, as businesses are growing with us, then they are finding that they have more opportunity. Again, this isn't novel, but the point I'm trying to impress upon is that when you've got a leader who is very intentional about the decision, you know, who's sitting around this table, we are seeing how it is making a difference in our spending habits. Absolutely.
So I'm going to take your question around democratizing data. So for us, this is not necessarily a leadership-driven initiative. This is coming from a federally funded project that we're building the infrastructure to further support the university going forward. So we have a Promise Neighborhood grant, $30 million grant. As part of that requirement, we have to do a neighborhood survey in years 1, 3, and 5. We have worked through our School of Public Health to train local residents to become IRB certified surveyors. They helped design, pilot, and conduct all of the surveys. 2 of those original surveyors are now full-time members of my team, leading outreach and community resource coordination. We have a cohort of surveyors that we bring back every other year. They have now been promoted to data leads, and they are part of the leadership deciding how this information goes back out to community. So they are designing the surveys, we're doing the community conversations. They are part of this work. We're trying to get funding from our Vice Provost of Research to fund a surveyor institute. And part of that value proposition is that we have IRB certified local residents who bring a level of authenticity to this project that you don't get elsewhere. They have the ability to be content agnostic and somewhat shovel ready, so that if you start to bring on other human subject research in a local context projects, you can start to build a model where different, principal investigators are investing in this infrastructure to keep folks employed year round. The other way that we're using data is, as we think about sustainability of this work, some of it's in organizations, but a lot of it's in people. And it's not just your civic leaders, it's, your block captains, and it's Miss Gwen who lives down the street who everybody knows. Right? Like, she needs this power. And so one of the things that we've launched, and I'll be honest, it wasn't an easy sell, is the West Philadelphia Power Academy. We started out by calling it an advocacy academy. I got called to the table a little bit on that one. We do not use the Scarlet A, but we have co-developed and co-named our new Power Academy, which is all about providing residents with access to the tools, awareness, and education they need to advocate for themselves and their families. Part of that session is on data. Understanding publicly available data, understanding how to access university data, and what do you do with it? And we had one of our local residents who is a pretty vocal member of an RCO, which is a registered community organization, say, well, I've been really pissed at the anchors, but actually I should be really mad at the policymakers because it's not actually about you guys. I didn't understand that. They're still going to be mad at us, but it's still about really making sure that people understand, because these are not living laboratories around our campus that are for us to study and not give back. So
If you wanted applause, you should have gone into show business.
All right, Logan.
Yeah, and I guess I'll speak to the Shadow of the Ivory Tower. Yeah, Devarian Baldwin is a brilliant man, has incredible research. He was actually I was on a group with him. They're applying for a truth, racial healing and transformation grant or something. You guys probably know about that. Okay, you know all about that. All right. And so there's been a history there, like many institutions, and the application centered around the fence of Trinity College, where there's a street called Vernon Street that used to be open. There was a traumatic event. They closed the street. Now there's a big iron gate, and there's literally a black iron fence that goes along the eastern side of the campus. And the application was surveillance, like who's welcome here and who does the fence protect? So yeah, that's real. And that is something that Trinity is trying to build. And I know that they've been trying to build structures so that over time there's mutually beneficial, positive interactions that happen. So something that they have, what I think is pretty cool, is the Center for Hartford Engagement and Research. They've actually kind of pooled their community service, their service learning, where classes work with different community partners. And there's something called the Liberal Arts Action Lab, where they'll have students and faculty work with community partners to answer questions that community partners have. And I think over time, consistently showing up, it's led to projects that have been community generated. So they helped partner to make that bilingual walking tour app of the people's history of the neighborhood that the Harvard Public Library on Park Street was also a partner with. And so the hope is that, with that tool over time, there's no easy answer to that, just like being consistent, continually showing up, owning the history, developing positive relationships, and really being responsive. But yeah, DeVary makes some very strong points. And there's certainly things that, they're seeking to address in the present moment.
With 4 minutes left.
I was interviewed by Devarian for the book, and I had a strong sense. Devarian is a wonderful writer, by the way, but I had a strong sense that he had actually written the book and then done the interviews, because when I saw what he quoted me saying, it was so out of context that I actually had to call him and say, "Can you make a couple of changes in what you quote me saying?" And he actually was very responsive, and he did, in fact, make some of those changes. But it's right, it's true, it's absolutely true. There is this trust. When my first week in Sina, my first community meeting I got blasted by Lou Santana, who was a graduate of HART, the IAF defunct organization that Logan was talking about. And she was concerned that Sina was doing the dirty work of the hospitals, buying up properties and kicking out low-income residents. And we just kept talking to her. I just kept talking to her over the years, and that conversation continued. And now she is really one of the allies that I really count on in the community work. You got to have an insider and an outsider, right? She's the outsider, and then we can be the insiders. So she is a wonderful partner now. And there is, I think, a lot of distrust, but if you don't continue to talk, and if you don't continue the conversation, you're not going to make any difference. You have to continue that conversation.
Thanks, Melvin. Thanks, panel. Another really insightful panel. Thanks to you in the audience for raising incredible questions and points. Our role is not to try to shy away from the hard issues. This is one of the reasons why equitable growth and racial equity were at the center of our agenda, so that they could stimulate the very kinds of conversations that we just had. I talked about before what we can do as the Anchor Institutions Task Force to be a resource and of service to this work. We have our Anchor Partnerships subgroup, which started this year and has done a great deal already and helped inform this meeting. You heard from 6 of the members. There are 2 other members. Denver Anchor Network is actually represented here. And also we have the St. Petersburg Anchor Institutions Initiative, which is not represented here, which is also part of this subgroup. So we're going to continue to have the learning exchange that's in that community of practice of our subgroup. We certainly can bring other anchor institution partnerships within that group. So if there are others you know of who might have an interest in being a part of that in some way, please let us know. As I mentioned before, this is a central issue for us. It's a major priority. We actually have been embarking on a research project to take inventory of the anchor institution partnerships in existence. And so that is an ongoing thing for us. And also, again, if you know of any particular partnerships, particularly ones that won't show up online at this point in time, might be in an early stage of development and should be in touch with us, please do let us know, because we want to continue that research. We certainly also want to continue to hear from all of you in terms of your thoughts about how we can continue this kind of a conversation. Hopefully our discussion today was useful to you. Thanks again to the Netter Center for Community Partnerships and the University of Pennsylvania, Ira Harkavy, Rita Hodges especially, and also thank you to Jason West for all the incredible organization in this work. Thanks again to all of you who are in attendance and to the leadership of the Anchor Institutions Task Force, our advisory council, our chairs, and thanks to all of our incredible speakers. So I promised that we would be done at 3. I believe we are just about there. So thanks a lot. And please, folks, let us know. Please, folks, let us know what kinds of, if this format of a meeting is useful to you, other things we can do in this regard. Thanks.